Welcome. I hope you're all comfortable, and I'm thrilled to see you all here today. Thank you for coming. This is a very exciting day. I'm thrilled to have Will Bonsall here. Welcome, Will. He drove down from Maine yesterday, and today he's going to talk about veganic gardening and farming, the what, why, and how. This is especially exciting for me because I purchased this land with a dream of starting a veganic farm to have it serve as a veganic demonstration project and to educate the public for the purpose of creating more demand for veganically grown food. It might not seem like much of a farm yet, but the exciting thing is that we'll have the opportunity to go out later and walk the land and use my property as a case study to learn how to use what's already here and how to do it with minimal outside inputs and no intentional animal inputs. So some animal inputs happen from nature, and that's totally fine, but no intentional. I hope you'll be interested in seeing how it changes over time and get involved if you would like. And while this is all so very exciting, it's also a very bittersweet day. And I might cry. Last Sunday, I lost a friend of 28 years, George Eisman, a registered dietitian. He died from lung cancer, even though he never smoked. He was a person who was gentle, compassionate, and truly made the world a better place. George was very interested in veganic agriculture, and he and his wife, Claire Holzner. Claire, can you just stand up a minute so people can see who you are? That's Claire. They created a veganic initiative with their group, Vegetarian and Vegan Association, or VAVA for short. They just started this initiative in March. I decided on a whim to see if I could get Will to come give a presentation here. I emailed him for the first time 2.5 weeks ago. I found out he doesn't travel after May 1st, so I asked if he could come the last weekend of April, and you know what his answer was. When I called George and Claire to tell them that Will was coming to give a workshop at my house on 2.5 weeks' notice, George, who was very weak and bedridden, was beyond excited. He spent the last 3 days that he was able to communicate helping to plan this day. For 3 days, we texted and emailed and called back and forth, but his voice was so weak that Claire had to interpret what he was saying. George gave all kinds of great ideas, and he even helped plan the lunch menu. In addition, he surprised me by getting funding to cover Will's expenses and the lunch. He told Claire, his brother, and his son that he was so excited because helping to plan the workshop was giving him purpose. And I mean, his whole life was full of purpose. His whole life was being an activist and making great things happen. But this made him very excited, even while he was so ill, to still be doing something to make a difference. And here you are, all are proof of that. So, and so this day's here, but George is not, and I wish he could be. As George and Claire were planning their veganic initiative in March, he wrote a little bit about veganic agriculture. I would like his wife, Claire Holzner, to read what he wrote.
All right, I just wanted to say a few words about the motivation that George and I had in starting our veganic farming initiative with our group, which is called the Vegetarian and Vegan Association, VAVA. And I do have contact information over there if you want to get that later. So the veganic initiative of our group, we started it in March, as Amie said, because our awareness of what shifting to plant-based eating can do to help create a saner, kinder, and better world has a weak link in the food-growing realm. Farmers are producing plant foods, but still using, especially in organic, but in non-organic as well, farming, inputs from the livestock industry for fertilization purposes. Mainly manure, but also other byproducts like blood meal, bone meal, fish emulsions, feathers from poultry, and so on. If these products are bought, that helps the profits of the livestock industry, perpetuating it and reducing the costs of meat, dairy, and eggs. Even if the byproducts are given away, it saves the cost of disposal, still helping the bottom line and still wasteful of transport fuel. So vegans have plenty of processed food manufacturers, for example, the 1 Degree company that we mentioned that's in Canada that is veganic, and plenty of restaurants serving plant-based meals, but they lack availability of produce grown in a vegan system. Restaurants wanting to provide truly clean food, manufacturers wanting to source ingredients that are truly vegan in their production process, and consumers wanting to buy direct from farmers who truly don't have blood or bone or feathers on their hands will flock to these products with just a little bit of education about these issues. But there's not much point in education about the issues if the products aren't available. The new farmer who is educated, aware, environmentally conscious is tired of smelling manure being spread on our fields, tired of runoff from livestock operations, and of having their produce contaminated from manure runoff. So our initiative is intended to connect farmers who want to transition to veganic growing by connecting people with experienced veganic farmers and with information and books and materials and marketing suggestions and ideas. So that's all available from our group, co-sponsored together with the Club Veg with Amie. Okay, and so I just want to say in closing that it would be George's greatest wish if people here today could be inspired to think about how our system of agriculture that involves animals is both the conventional system and the local and organic and sustainable. If it involves animals, it is necessarily involves violence, and it isn't truly sustainable. And veganic agriculture is one way to produce food in a more peaceful and natural way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.
So it is with that inspiration that we'll begin this day of learning, and I hope you will get a lot out of it. There will be plenty of time to ask questions. Club Veg is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization started in 1995, and one of its more recent initiatives is Veganic Education. And we are partnering with Vegetarian and Vegan Association, Claire's group, since we both have veganic initiatives. Last year, we featured Kelly Kirsten and Bob Flatley of Ahimsa Village in central Pennsylvania. You can learn more about them at ahimsavillage.org. Club Veg has been around since 1995. We started in Binghamton, in the Binghamton area, and then I moved here 11 years ago and expanded it to include Ithaca. Our activities are often off the radar, for example, corporate wellness and some other types of events that you wouldn't necessarily hear about. But we have a new website, clubveg.org. It's not done yet, but it's there. And we look forward to becoming more visible in the community. So, without further delay, I would like to introduce Will Bonsall. Will is the author of the book, Will Bonsall's Essential Guide to Radical Self-Reliant Gardening. He and his family are vegan, and he grows a good deal of the food they eat, including food from all the plant categories, vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. He even presses some of his own seed oil. He's featured in the movie Seed, The Untold Story, which was featured on PBS just last week. He's well known in the seed-saving community and has a seed-saving project called Scatter Seed. He's a pioneer in the veganic growing movement. I'll let Will tell you the rest. Will, thank you for coming today. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming Will.
First of all, I have one fault to find with Amie. If I am encouraging people to make donations, I do not put out a pint jar. I mean, just, you know. It totally sends the wrong message. I don't know. I would put a hat, preferably a 10-gallon hat or something like that. But anyway. Before we even get started, it's very helpful to me and will be to all of us if I have some idea to what extent I'm preaching to the choir or who the group are here. Just for example, how many of you here are vegan? Oh, okay. Amie thought they were a minority here. How many of you are vegetarian, but not vegan? Okay. How many of you are gardeners? Okay. Oh, this is okay. You're my kind of folks. How many of you are farmers in the sense that you grow stuff to sell? Okay, only a couple. Okay, that's okay. Well, that's all really important to know. I have something to say to all of you. I hope you'll find out that maybe you'll find useful. So, to begin with, this pre-lunch part of this is going to focus a lot on the why aspects of and some very underlying visionary broad ecological concepts. And it's one ball of wax, so there's no particular beginning or end. So we basically end temporarily when Amie tells us it's time to eat, and then we resume after. So it might or might not be a nice neat break. That's why it's handy to know that, you know, if some of you were taking off for the march, then you'd be missing some part or other of it. If any of you were having qualms about not going to the march, coming here instead, I would point out, kind of self-servingly, that it's great to be active, to be protesting, to make make statements, but it sometimes becomes kind of hollow if we're not doing things in our lives to back that up. And I'm hoping that the stuff I will share with you today will help you to do more specifically, individually, in your personal lives, other than protesting against the system, which is also a great thing to do. So, anyway, my focus, and I usually do focus on this so that I'm not preaching to the choir. When I'm talking about veganic gardening, I tend to not focus on what I call the bunny hugging side of it. Not the compassion for animals, the non-violence, all perfectly good. I'm totally on board with all of those. But there's another rationale or line of thought behind it, which I feel is even more compelling because it appeals to people. After all, not everyone considers themselves to be ethical. Not everyone aspires to be. You use that argument, a lot of people, no, I don't want to go there. You know, this is fun. I like the taste of this, or whatever. You know, don't care if it's ethical. Appeal to someone's business sense. You know, this is stupid. This is impractical. Oh no, not me. No, I'll change whatever it takes. So I try to appeal to a very, very pragmatic side of people more than the compassion. Most of you already know about the compassion side, and I don't have to dwell on that, although we'll be hitting on it a little bit. Anyway. Whenever we're trying to come up with some really good answers to something, we have to keep in mind that we have to start off by asking the right questions. And all too often we aren't. Organic agriculture fails to ask some of the really good questions. And the vegan movement and vegetarian movement tend to neglect some of the big underlying questions. And so what I'm hoping on hitting on a lot this morning is first stating our questions, our problems, asking the right questions, and then we can give more effective thought to how we might answer them. If we're talking about what is really organic and what is really sustainable, then we have to go beyond the minimal definitions of which basically consists of some things that we don't do. We don't use this on our soil. We don't put this on our plates. That's fine, but that's not anywhere near going far enough. There's both sustainability and organic, and I maintain veganism have much more profound implications than simply what we don't do. And I'm going to be talking a lot about that. And also, briefly, and I'll be hitting on this again and again, is if in our food system, your personal garden or your big, factory farm where your food comes from in the grocery store, if we're interested in a more natural, quote, natural diet, natural system of farming and so on, then we have to ask ourselves, what ecosystem are we modeling in nature? What natural ecosystem are we copying? And I'll dwell on this a lot more later, but if we look at the typical garden, organic or otherwise, and you look at rows that are 3 feet apart, let's say, and in between them is cultivated soil, bare ground, what ecosystem are we modeling? Desert. No, worse than that. I've spent a lot of time in deserts, and it's rare that you have 3 feet between a little bit of grass or a cactus or something. We're doing worse than deserts. So how eco-efficient, how really natural is this thing, and what can we do otherwise? So we'll go there too. So let's see. Another, in my opinion, a key feature, key factor of sustainable and therefore organic farming. Maybe I should have said organic and therefore sustainable farming, because I believe we cannot have one without the other. There are plenty of organic systems out there which are not sustainable, and vice versa. The key factor we should be keeping in mind is what I call the bottom line. Not only the economic bottom line, dollars and cents if we're buying and selling things, but also the ecological. We should always be asking ourselves, where does fertility come? Whence fertility and whither fertility? Where do we get this stuff from, and where is it going to? That's the thing that organic wholesale ignores those things, and we can't. Because in a real natural system, things don't come from somewhere else for the most part. They come from there. The soil, the land generates its own wherewithal for maintaining itself. Look at the woodlots around here, the forest, and who goes out there and puts manures their forest, or sprays their forest, or puts 10-10-10 or compost on their forest? No, you don't do any of that stuff. Lawns, people's lawns, you rake it up every year. If either you mow it there, or we used to always rake it up and haul it off to the landfill or whatever. And except the people who are really fanatic about putting all the Smith, whatever, the lawn products on. In my town anyway, people don't put much of anything on their lawn except some doggy doo-doo and the Halloween candy wrappers they get, whatever. And yet it keeps growing. It's kind of like my hair. If I shaved my head or got a haircut, it would come right back again. That's very sustainable, okay? As long as I keep eating the things that hair is made of. I'm getting kind of digressing here a bit, but the land is sort of like producing hair. It's growing it, and all we have to do is allow it to and encourage to do what it does the best. Now, let's start right off by focusing on, I may have to take it down because I don't know if you can see it easily. Can anyone see this poster? Most of you cannot. Well, it's so important that I'm going to take it down, and if I have to put it back up again, because this is a key part of what our discussion will focus on. I was talking to my dad once when he was alive. We were talking about ecology. And we're talking about the times, nowadays. And I said, well, what about when you were a kid, when you were in school, did anything said then about ecology? Oh, yes, he remembered something, kind of vaguely. There was like a little bit of one lesson, like maybe an hour one day in class, that they talked about. And I remember this too in grade school. He said there was like a thing about the little plankton being eaten by a little fish and being eaten by a big fish, and somewhere down the line a person having a tuna fish sandwich or whatever. And in other words, the food chain. We had that too. We had it in elementary school. It's the progression of this thought. It's kind of interesting. It progressed through our education, and I presume yours too. We first had this food chain thing. Totally accurate as far as it goes. It's a great answer to the wrong question. Then later, I think it was in high school or something, we learned instead of a food chain, the thing called a food web. And the graphic for that was a whole lot more complicated. All these things all interconnected. That was a lot better. Things all interconnected back and forth, not some single linear thing. Well, that was very good, but it still was not enough of an answer to the real question. And then in high school biology, we finally got this thing that looked like this, like the bottom one, okay? For the moment, ignore the top one. Okay, it looked kind of like a Maya temple kind of thing. And the reason why they changed it from the web is people by that point, ecologists had studied this whole thing enough to know that there are, it's not a chain or a web, or at least it's more than that. There is a proportion, a quantitative proportion between the things at the bottom that get eaten and the things further up that eat and themselves get eaten, and so on, okay? And at the bottom, you remember this, of course, the bottom was, I made them green because these things all have one, whether it's algae or grass or maple trees, they all have one characteristic. They all have chloroplasts in their leaves, okay? They all do this magic called photosynthesis. And therefore, they produce things. You might like to think that you are a productive person. I'm sorry, you are not. You are a consumer. I won't say parasite, that may be a little too, but we are parasites on the earth. In other words, we take something from the host that's way out of proportion to what we put back. Eventually you die, you rot, something eats you or whatever. So you put something back, but not in any proportion to what we require. Therefore, we are consumers. Now we have choices here. Unlike an awful lot of animals, being omnivorous, we can be either first-order consumers or second-order or third-order consumers and so on. A lot of animals, they're where they are. We have a lot of choices here. And basically the numbers, the higher numbers have kind of a stigma along with it. Being further up the food chain is, not so cool. But anyway, so let's keep this in mind. This model that we had in our high school biology book was wonderful. It was much better as far as it went. But it did ignore something that since then, people who study the numbers behind ecosystems basically find out that there is every level of consumption. There is basically a loss. There's a wide range, but typically somewhere in the area of 90%. In other words, in the process of living and breathing and peeing and pooping and walking around and making love and all of the things that people do, there's about 10% of that actually goes to, you might say, to you, to create something, some physicalness. And so it's pretty wasteful. And so this does not reflect that at all. So I came up with this diagram. Every level is 1/10 of what is above it. So there's no sense being moralistic about this. We can't photosynthesize. That's out of the question. We've got to consume. We have to parasitize the system. But where we do on it is look at the difference between this and this. The next order up, like a tuna fish, would be up here would be, hard to see a line. So it looks more like a submarine, sort of. And that's the reality. And let's keep that in mind, because this is far too values neutral. It doesn't tell us what it really looks like. And it's important to know that. So,
Can you read those labels? I can't quite see them.
oh, they just are producer, and first order consumer, and second order consumer, and so on. So, that's basically what I just told you. So if you were paying attention, you already got it. Okay. So I'll put that up for now. We may reference it again. So this is a major reason, I would say it's one of the better reasons, quite frankly, why so many people are vegetarian or vegan, is they're aware of this ecological thing. Is they may not care who gets killed because of something, but it simply is your footprint on the planet. You're just occupying an awful lot of world resources. There we get into issues not only of animal rights, but again, as Wilton was commenting, we not only have ecological, environmental justice, human justice, is who's being screwed so I can eat this? Whose pocket is this? Who's paying for this? What's the bottom line? And so it has to factor into all of our considerations. So let's see, I don't want to get ahead of myself with this particular thing. No, that would be, my notes. I apologize I talk so fast. It's just the way I am. I get excited. And Grandpa used to say when I was born I was vaccinated with a Victrola needle. And some of you are old enough to get that. Most of you probably don't get that. But anyway, so what typically farmers or gardeners, including organic farmers and gardeners, tend to do is what I call cake mix gardening, cake mix farming, where you bring in something from somewhere else. And you bring in some lime and some phosphate and some sulfamag and some manure perhaps, or whatever the things are you get. Sorry. We didn't decapitate you yet with that, did we? Let's put it there, maybe it'll stay. And we mix them all up, put them in the garden. We grow something, we sell the thing off to the market, okay? To me, that's not a very organic system. That's like a cake mixing bowl, where things come together and things from outside. So I'll hit on this first. As I think Amie was even or actually Claire was making some reference to this, if we buy some organic vegetables somewhere, or any kind of vegetables for our nice self-righteous vegan diet, and those things were grown on manure from a dairy farm, or what else, we can look into any of these lines of supply and find problems with all of them. But basically we find out that it's kind of disturbing if you realize that, I can be a very self-righteous vegan as long as most of them aren't. As long as all the other people are still keeping the dairy cattle and having a lot of surplus manure that I can do. How? Sorry, take it home for a souvenir. Just get it out of here. Who's really paying the bill? To what extent is this? One of the concerns I have about tofu, for example, aside from the fact that it's wimp food, so tofu is just like a very highly fractionated, it's like white flour and those kind of things, as opposed to tempeh. Tempeh, hey, that's guy food. I can get into that. That's great. That's real. Yeah, that's something solid. But tempeh, you take away this. You need me over here further, don't you? I think. Sorry, I was in the wrong place. That was okay either way. Okay. That tofu, you extract an awful lot of stuff from it, and including the okara, the pulp. The main reason you can buy tofu so cheaply is there's someone out there buying their okara to fatten their pigs on. Okay? Your tofu is subsidized by the meat industry. And if it weren't, it would cost 3 times as much, perhaps. So it's, again, there's not only blood on, if we're eating animal products, there's not only blood on the food we eat, but even if we're not, there may be blood on it indirectly behind it. There may be everything that looks like it's vegan may only be vegan if you look at the upfront part of it. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, I probably berated that one too much already, but so I'm saying that I think one of the most compelling and universally valid reasons for being vegetarian and better yet vegan is to be lower on the food pyramid, to be occupying less of the Earth's resources, having a smaller footprint, whether it's a carbon footprint, a physical geographical space, to keep yourself happy, fat, and healthy, and enjoying life. Now, so this becomes so important now. Yeah, I got to bring it up again. Because, okay, by what you eat alone, you can control where you are. You can be here instead of there. You can't be here. Okay, so what about the soil itself? Not only what we eat, but what about what our food eats? Because we have to put stuff to maintain a healthy soil. We have to putting stuff in it. And the usual assumption, again, back to, quote, conventional organic, at one time used to be like an oxymoron. It was kind of like jumbo shrimp, or, sexual excess, military intelligence, all this kind of country music, all that. Is there anyone haven't offended yet? It was one of those kind of things, like mainstream vegan, it's kind of like, wow, what do we... but it's getting so it is not such an oxymoron. It's getting so that there is such a thing as mainstream organic, which of course is completely predicated on the cow pies, pretty much. I mean, that's what the usual assumption, at least in the Northeast, and also green manure. The conventional organic basically says the same things that the chemical people do. In fact, they have you take a soil test, which is usually done by some extension agent who's basically used to, they're saying, okay, you can get away with organic farming, it's okay. Earl Butz said you couldn't, but you can. If you do enough other things, you have to jump through a lot of hoops. In other words, really the ideal, of course, is using animal manure. But there are other ways you could, just like they'll tell us, yes, I've heard that you can be a vegetarian and be healthy if you eat enough eggplant or spirulina or food yeast or some, you can do it if you do something. And of course, we know, I think most of us are aware that we don't have to make that comparison. Is the vegan diet is intrinsically superior to begin with. So why would we make that comparison? And I'm submitting to you that the same thing applies to the food system. Is that we don't have to try to come up with something to make our soil good. Soil wants to be good. Soil has the capacity to make itself good. Otherwise, life would never evolve, come into existence on the planet. Plant things can produce so much more than they themselves need so that they build the soil. This is the key thing. We're not talking about maintaining soil fertility. That's basically all that conventional organic does. Putting a lot of moo poo, cow pies on the land is intended to maintain the fertility. I mean, yeah. And it barely does that. It doesn't build fertility. And the main thing that builds fertility, well, how does Mother Nature build? Because I'm always hearing this thing, well, Mother Nature farms with animals, doesn't it? Yes, it does. How does Mother Nature farm with animals? If I think of my whole land, my 85 acres or so, most of which is woodlot, and some of it's fields and orchard and stuff, and in a typical piece of land like that, there may be maybe about one per 50 or 100 acres, one big stupid mammal, okay? And a deer, let's say, anyway. And then there may be a dozen or so smaller little furry animals, rabbits and woodchucks and raccoons and things like that. Maybe dozens of them. There may be thousands of mice and voles and billions of caterpillars and roly-polies and the little things and zillions of, those are all animals. That's how Mother Nature farms with animals, not with a dozen big, stupid, cattle or sheep or something. So we're not mimicking the system at all when we put large numbers of, and I'm one of them. So basically by that ecological balance, there's room enough on my land for one big stupid mammal. If I try to have anything else on there, my kid's got to go. Wife, sorry, there's only room for that, okay? So therefore it makes sense to leave the livestock out of it. Just by the way, I backtrack a little bit. I first got into veganic farming, although I was a vegan. I mainly got into it not through the veganic side of it, the manure part of it, not so much through ideology as a very pragmatic thing. And at that time there were several dairy farmers around the area. I could get manure easy enough. But it occurred to me, on the one hand, this is inconsistent to using someone else's animal products to make myself vegan. But also I was not in a position, financially or otherwise, to buy in stuff, to buy in phosphate, to buy in lime, to buy in manure and all these things. So for very pragmatic reasons, I've had to find a way of producing them right here on my land, growing them on the spot. So that's how I got into it. Again, not through any compassion, not even concerned about the aesthetics. I'd smelled enough cow manure, that wasn't terribly oppressive to me and so on, but this just does not make as much sense as something else I might do. So So when we look at what kind of natural climax ecosystem do we want to model, we can't actually use the ecosystems as is because we humans don't, the kind of foods that we're used to are not mostly there. To some extent we can and should. But what kind of ecosystem generally? Right now we're modeling a desert ecosystem, a rather bad desert ecosystem. What can we do that's better? Well, dairy farming is actually, in some ways, does model rather poorly, but it models a natural ecosystem, prairie or grassland. Like when the original settlers came to, let's say, this area of New York, like my area of Maine, they had to create grassland because most of this state was not natural prairie. So you cut down the forests, burn or whatever you did, and turn it into grassland. You have to keep it as grassland. As you can see here, Amie's got this issue here. We all do. If you have let a piece of cow pasture, the dairy farmer goes out of business. My area is full of this. Goes out of business, and the fields start growing up to suckers, pucker brush, and stuff. Okay, so it doesn't want to be. Apparently, it doesn't really prefer to be grassland. It would rather be something else. Well, what it was forest. Okay, so we have to put a lot of labor, either labor and effort, mowing it, keeping it grassland, or the animals do that. Very inefficiently, by the way, but still, the animals do that. So the model that a lot of us are too inclined to use is of grassland. For example, some of you may be aware of the VON, Veganic Organic Network, or something in Britain. Of course, the Brits are all a bunch of bunny huggers anyway, even worse than you guys. And they, and in one of their publications, I read a thing. The guy was saying something to the effect that the best thing we can do with this grassland, with this land, is to grow the grass, and instead of feeding it to a cow, who wastes 90% of it, compost it or mulch it, and use it directly to make, since we can't eat the grass, turn it into something we can eat. Hey, the guy's right on as far as he went. That's not the best use of that land. But I can see why he thought it was, because, you know, in Britain, they do not have very much of something that we here have quite a lot of, forests. Yeah, they've destroyed all of theirs. So but the usual paradigm that we all have, the model most of us have from our upbringing, it's so embedded in our culture, is of lush green hayfield with some nice little moo-moos or babas in it, you know, and that's what we think. You look at all the old Gainsborough paintings and stuff, you know, this is lush land. But this is actually butchered land in a way. It's kept this way artificially. There's a much better use of it, and that much higher use would be forests. Well, there's kind of a problem there. I'm not really partial to maple bark and pine needles, and there's a little, you know, how much I want something I can put on my plate. And so that's one of the things that the forest gardening, agroforestry is very much into. And I'm very skeptical of it, but the underlying principle is perfect. And the permaculture people, great idea. The ways they go about it are sometimes kind of absurd because, among other things, the ideal, most I don't think I've yet introduced the word eco-efficient. And it's the idea we've been talking about. That's the word I use. In other words, what does it require and what is it in proportion to what it takes? Forests may be the most eco-efficient system in this part of South Central New York or whatever. But again, we humans are not evolved to eat the things that it produces, for the most part. Okay, maple syrup, that's great. Have a diet of maple syrup. Acorns, actually, two products of our forests are actually very practical. We tend to ignore them. Acorns and chestnuts. Now, acorns are basically, I mean, chestnuts are largely wiped out by but we can reintroduce them with hybrids, oriental chestnuts, and we should. There's lots of, the American Chestnut Society is working on reintroducing blight-resistant chestnuts, because these have an incredible capacity. A lot of the permaculture things, a lot of the forest things they produce a lot of berries and nuts and little things that are nice to make jam and wine and little condiments out of. I want the meat, quote, meat. Okay, when I hear you say meat, you all read me, right? I want something that's in the middle of the plate. I want the entree. I want the guy that fills me up. You know, the guy comes home from the paper mill or the forest, you know, and, hey, that's good, I'll have some of that. Not some nice little, you know, shishi frou-frou gourmet thing. We want things to produce those. And at least two tree crops do that magnificently. Chestnuts and acorns. And acorns have to be processed, most of them, to get, they have too much tannin in them. You get the tannin out of them, they're extremely nutritional. And an acre of either chestnuts or oaks will support far more people with far more or less disruption of the land than our soybeans and corn and rice and all those kind of things. So insofar as we can base our diet on those, that's the big thing. Insofar as we can do it, we should. That's great. That's the really creme de la creme of that's a very un-vegan thing. We'll think of another expression for that. But it's kind of like, you know, killing two birds with one stone and stuff like that. We need to discover develop a new vocabulary here. Anyway, like living high on the hog, how do you live high on the soybean? I don't know what we do with that. But anyway, so insofar as we can use those, great. But I'm suggesting to you, I think most of you are not going to want to base your diet on most of the things from the forest. So we're all pretty blinking used to eating cabbage and corn and soybeans and potatoes and wheat and all these kind of things. And in terms of eco-efficiency, those things really suck. They're basket cases. They are all what I refer to as Band-Aid species. Almost all of them are. And by that I mean that what happens if Mother Nature gets an owie? Let's say in this area you have a forest and a tree blows over, or fire sweeps through, or a guy with a chainsaw, or something happens to disturb, uproot, bear some sort of flood, something that makes them bare soil. It's like Mother Nature's got an owie. There's a break there. Well, if you've got a cut and you look, oh, I'm bleeding, do you say, I'm bleeding. I better give more attention to my long-term nutrition and my vitamin K. And you say, no, wait, bleeding, a Band-Aid. For now, get a Band-Aid on it. Then we'll deal with the other stuff. When Mother Nature gets an owie, some bare soil, an uprooted tree or something like that, basically she says, put a Band-Aid on it. And she has a bunch of species that are right there, usually right around there in the soil, kind of biding their time until it's like a Band-Aid in your wallet. You may go the whole life without needing it, but if you do, you want it there. And these Band-Aid species are things like Queen Anne's lace and various grasses and a lot of the annual weeds, wild mustard and those kind of things. These are Band-Aid species. They don't produce very much in terms of soil building stuff, in terms of what they require. They're just a pass-through phase, something to cover them right now, just a little Band-Aid, and soon they die and other things come in, brush, and eventually it goes back to being the forest, okay? So these Band-Aid species happen to be most of the things that we've got on our plate are Band-Aid. They're evolved, we've developed them from these wild weeds, they're Band-Aid species. So our tummies like them. They're relatively low in fiber compared to pine needles and elm bark and stuff. And they're very dense in nutrition. And they're really good for us and our finicky tummies. But they are not particularly eco-efficient. So you're not going to use them for soil building for the most part. If you look in the back of your seed company, seed catalog, and if they have a section there on green manure plants, you won't find pumpkins there. You won't find leeks or Brussels sprouts. Even if you were to plant a piece thickly to pumpkins, let's say, and let it grow all, don't even eat the pumpkins, eventually turn it all under. How much would you build the soil? I'm not sure if at all, but it's certainly not much in proportion to something else, because it took a lot to make the pumpkins in proportion to what you get back. So what you find instead in the green manure section are things like winter rye and clover and buckwheat, some of these things which are relatively much more eco-efficient. They produce a lot, and they also happen to, most of them actually give us some food too. Clover doesn't, of course. Well, clover sprouts. So if we're looking at our forest again and saying, I want to eat from that as much as I can, the only way we can do it to any large extent is to indirectly eat from the forest. And I'm going to, probably after lunch, we're going to go into this on quite detail, because this is one of the more radical parts of my system. One of the more radical things in my book is eating indirectly from the forest. In other words, using the forest as the main source of soil building material. Now again, the British author of that article is talking about grass for it, and that's fine. If you've got hayfield, like Amie's mainly got grass, or will if we get some of the brush cut off here, get it so it grows back. So you've got grass. But if we're not feeding it to ungulates, and we want to feed it, put it in her garden to grow food out of, then we'd want to get good grass there. But grass will not be the ultimate. She'll use it because it's what she's got. Far better, not instead of, but in addition to, would be stuff from her woods. You have some woods here, don't you? Some of this is a couple acres of trees, particularly hardwood trees, is the leaves from them and the chipped brush, which we refer to as ramial wood or ramial chips, the small stuff. The big stuff, of course, is more valuable for saw logs or paper or even firewood. You're not going to chip up big pieces of wood for soil building generally, unless it's falling down, it's half rotten. But all this stuff, the forest can produce, in other words, forest litter, whether it's woody stuff or leaves, can produce tons of stuff per year without depleting the forest soil itself. If there is such a thing as a free lunch, then I submit it has to be an old-growth hardwood forest, which churns out tons and tons of stuff, maybe for generations, without ever putting something back into it. But yeah, that's the big question. I've given you this big visionary picture. We're going to use our forest to produce the fertility in one form or another, mulch, compost, soil building material, to grow our leeks and our pumpkins and our soybeans and so forth. So So it's very good as far as I've gone, but then there's a whole lot of, but how do you go about it without, and we'll focus a lot on that later because it's the ultimate. Without it, everything I'm saying is kind of useless. Take a bunch of sawdust and plow it under and think you're good, But again, the point I'm trying to make here is we're trying to keep our footprint as modest as possible and also to feed the soil that feeds us in as sustainable as possible way. There's all kinds of things I put in my soil to build it up. Like all of you, the residues from my kitchen, my garbage and stuff like that, crop residues, weeds, all of those things go into it. But those, in a really closed cycle, a sustainable system, those should not be the pillar of my soil building program. They are simply salvaging some waste. But what I'm basically using to the machine that drives this thing is stuff that's not waste. It is itself a crop, the leaves and the ramiol and the grass and so forth. These are the things which feed the soil, which feeds me. Okay, so there's a parrot up there that's trying to compete with me. He's, I think he's completely agreeing with me. I can tell that, though. Most of you probably don't speak parrot, but he's basically second me on everything. So one of the problems, the reason I get into thinking about all this stuff this way is I'm in some ways a very lucky, privileged situation by virtue of the fact that I am not and have never been a market gardener. I'm a hippie, back to the land homesteader kind of guy who's growing stuff to eat. And I've grown some things off and on to sell, but for the most part, the stuff I produce is for my own use. Moreover, since I've always been too poor to buy in all the cool soil amendments and all those things to use, then I've had to generate them myself in different ways. And for example, the first year I moved there, I bought 2 bags of lime. And if I could take them back and get my money back, because I've never used any since, and I didn't need to use it then. I thought I did. What I now, quote, lime my garden and my soils with is wood ash. Now again, my situation was because I can't afford to heat with oil, and I have tons of firewood, then I burn wood, and the ash residue is my lime. Well, let's digress a little bit into ash. Plant ashes, lime is lime. It's calcium. If you get dolomitic lime, it has a little magnesium in it, but it has one single, it is the product of fossil, I don't know, not diatoms, but algae, things from back, it's more or less dinosaur farts. That's what anything to do with gasoline or petroleum, all this black plastic, all these things we're using running the rototiller, basically your system is based on burning dinosaur farts. And I'm trying to avoid that. So in the case of lime, this is fossil. I started my work career off in the mining business, prospecting for copper and stuff like that, and it rots. I decided I didn't want anything. I wanted to get into there's something more recycling. And what could be more recycling than organic gardening, organic farming? But then I started hearing all these organic people around me saying, there's so many tons per acre of sulfomag and so much of rock phosphate and there's colloidal this and that, and I thought I'd get out of that business. I not only don't want to be mining myself, but I don't want my system to be based on someone else tearing up the soil somewhere else to get some phosphate bed or something. Again, Mother Nature not only doesn't farm with animals primarily, but Mother Nature does not farm with any kind of inputs, does not bring in lime. Like I said, the wood lime, you don't lime it, you don't put phosphorus on it. It's there. Presumably it is there or was there in the rocks. In this case, in this area that the glacier, drawing all the drift or the products of erosion of the hillsides and stuff, these ground up, micronized, if you will, minerals have become available. Why aren't they enough? Well, they probably would be, except for 2 things. One is a lot of the things that we're growing in our gardens instead of the trees that originally were there, we're growing things that are a lot pickier. They have higher, we've bred them that way. They need lots of unusual amounts of phosphorus, unusual amounts of this and that. But what's worse than that, particularly if we're market gardening, or now in my case, I mentioned that I'm not buying stuff in from outside, but I'm also not sending stuff off. In fact, even the stuff that I eat myself turns into me poo, and I have a privy. We save it doesn't go into a septic system. It gets composted twice a year. We empty out the privy, and it gets composted and used on certain crops. Well, we can talk more about that later, but not all the crops. It could, but we don't use it on every crop. And so, therefore, I've got a closed circle. Okay, I grow it, I eat it, it goes back in, and so as long as I can keep the integrity of that circle, I should be able to go do this forever and ever, without having to bring anything to replace it. If nothing is lost to the system. Now, there are 2 major concerns with 2 forms of erosion that we typically have even in an organic system. One is, bare soil, water washing, and stuff leaching down or being swept away. That's the usual. Everyone worries about that form of erosion. There's another form of erosion that we never think of. We don't even think of it as erosion, and it is what I call the marketplace. You do this cake mix farming, you bring in some minerals, you grow a crop, and you send it off to the market, including all the minerals that were in it. Well, obviously, you've taken them out of this. They've got to be replaced. It's not like my system where those minerals are going through me, back in through me, and so on. And so, in some ways, commercial market gardening, even organic marketing, is, again, almost an oxymoron. Is because by the very nature, it's not sustainable, not organic, because you have to keep mining the soil, which I'm trying so hard to avoid. In terms of soil nutritional matter, there are two basic groups of things. The first part is the literal organic matter, all the stuff that's in the leaves, the stems, and so on. And it is basically primarily composed of four things: hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen. Well, the good news about those things is they're in the air all around us. So you don't have to import them. And we often do import cow manure, nitrogen in the form of that, or cellulose and stuff. You don't have to. Just as long as the breeze keeps blowing and the air keeps coming around, the soil will keep, as long as you have a soil community there, will keep sequestering those elements into the soil. So that part's fairly easy to do sustainably. The trickier part is, in addition to the organic matter, there's the little bit that's the minerals. If you burn a wheelbarrow full of hay, for example, and you end up with a spoonful of ash left, but that ash is extremely important. Now, unlike lime, which again is basically fossilized sea creatures containing basically just calcium, wood ash, if anything, trees or any other plant ashes, contains a much broader spectrum of minerals because, of course, it came from. It has all the things that a plant needs for minerals because it came from plants. It has about, I think, 1/6 calcium in it, as opposed to lime, which is nothing but calcium. But it also has a large proportion of potassium, magnesium, some of all those little trace minerals. They're there. Just by the way, why are they there instead of, they actually might not be in the top. You might do a soil test and it says, hey, you're low in molybdenum or pandemonium. That's one of my favorite trace elements. You all laugh, but you say californium, and no one laughs at that. So I say if there's it's probably very essential to a healthy organism to have a certain amount of trace mineral pandemonium in your diet. And so let's say it's not in the soil. It's either been leached away or carried off to market by centuries of cropping and so on. Where is it then? Aside from finding some deposit in the world of pandemonium dioxide, that you can whatever, it's down there. In almost all soils, unless you have pure sand, hundreds of feet deep or something, it's pretty much down there in the rocks that the soil here is made from. The problem is it's down there too far. A lot of trace minerals, including water, but also trace minerals, are down like maybe 20 feet, 30 feet deep. There's no way they're going to end up in your garden. There's no way they're going to end up in your plate and in your body. But trees, big old rock maple tree, big old oak tree, they send their roots down dozens of feet down, and they pump up those little trace minerals, which otherwise would not be part of the biosphere, would not be part of the world of the living. They would just be wherever the glacier dropped them, and they stay there forever. So in a sense, we're mining the soil. If there is such a thing, as if it's not an oxymoron, to have such a thing as sustainable mining, it would probably be in the form of a big rock maple tree. A big old hardwood tree that's got those minerals, pumps them up, and drops them on the topsoil as form of chips and residue and leaves and stuff like that. Eventually, if you exploit them, they end up in your compost bin or in your mulch or in your garden, in your food, in your tummy. Without importing any of these trace mineral supplements that have all these things that come from some volcanic lake bed in New Mexico or something like that. It's there already. If it's not there, there are some trace minerals, they're very minor but very important ones, which may just not be there. Maybe weren't even when the glacier brought them here, or when they were here because they weren't in the rocks in this particular corner of the world. Things like selenium and fluorine and boron. Some of these things either weren't there to begin with or they've been washed away and they're not easy to get back. Then maybe you have to send away to some lake bed in New Mexico or something to get these things, or seaweed extract or whatever. Maybe you have to get some of these things to put that thing in there. That's okay. But because for one thing, they don't have a huge carbon footprint other than moving potassium around. We're talking about things that you probably I could go out to California, I could hitchhike out there to Searles Lake and get a thing of borax, put enough in my knapsack and hitchhike back to Maine with it and put it out, and it'd be enough for 40, maybe the rest of my lifetime. So these are relatively sustainable mining compared to these big macronutrients. But however you get them, wherever they are, however much they cost, okay, if you need them, bring them, put them on the land. But, I'm going to say this real loud now, keep them there. Keep them there. Keep them going round and round and round. Now, some things are easily lost. Boron is easily lost through leaching. And iodine is easily lost through evaporation. These things can be lost from our system very easily. The more you cultivate, the more you lose them. The more you don't have good water control, the more you lose. There's all kinds of things that can help you lose them. There's one big thing that can help you keep them. Magic word, humus.
What?
Humus. Thank you, because I need to say that again. Humus, okay? The most important part of the soil is all the minerals, all the other things I'll talk about. Make sure you have a lot. If you have enough humus, it's like the line from the movie, build it and they will come, okay? If you have a community of active soil creatures there, then you put a little boron, iodine. Okay, let's say some iodine, you put some seaweed on there. The seaweed rots. Pretty soon that iodine will leach away, be gone. Unless something like a crop or a weed or something appropriates it, assimilates it, turns it into weedness. And then that weed rots and breaks down and gets turned into earthworm poop. And that in turn gets turned into roly-polies. And one thing after each, it goes round and round and round. And this humus material, which is hard to define, a mixture of organic matter in different stages of decay. Primarily cellulose, by the way, that's good news. That's carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. This is cheap stuff, wood. So it forms these humates, which appropriate these minerals and lock them up there, tied, the molecule, the ion is like tied to this bit of humus until the next plant root comes down and appropriates, or the next worm comes along. So it's constantly tied up in living forms. As long as it's in living forms, almost the second something dies, something else comes along and eats it up and turns it into that. That's exactly what we want. This thing will not be lost to your system as long as there's something keeping on appropriating it. That's why humus is the number one thing. And that's the biggest advantage. Hey, this is on our side, folks. This is the big advantage of Veganic. Whether we have high nitrogen levels or not is secondary to high humus levels. And as I pointed out before, the people with their cow poo putting on there are putting relatively small amounts of humus. That's the big thing they organic. We're building the humus by putting this in. Building, you're hardly replacing it faster than it breaks down. That's why I have to keep on putting it in. It takes a lot of earth stuff to create the cow poo, and it's pretty much gone. When we praise manure as a fertilizer, all we're saying is it's better than 10-10-10. That's setting the bar pretty low, okay? We could do much better than, again, by looking at the natural ecosystem, by copying examples of a forest. That stuff. This is one of the objections, by the way. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but one of the conventional objections to using, let's say, ramial chips or leaves is, well, it takes forever to break down. Well, what's our concern about 10-10-10? It's here today, gone tomorrow. Doesn't it break? We want something that has a longer residual power, like cow manure. Well, let's use that logic to the next step. This ramial stuff. It may take, unlike a year or two, for cow manure to be totally mineralized, which largely is digested grass and grain. It may take 5 or 10 years for that little chip of wood to be totally broken down. And that's good, because in the meantime, it is acting as an energy substrate. It's primarily cellulose. There's not much nitrogen in it. There's a lot of things that aren't in it. But the cellulose acts as an energy substrate for a universe of living things. Every little particle has got, roly-polies and earthworms and centipedes and fungi and viruses and all kinds of things all living on it. And so in the course of all these things living there, somehow or other, minerals and nitrogen and so forth, they show up. If we have time later in the day, I'll give some examples of some ways that I've tried putting things on the soil which have negligible amounts of nitrogen in them, and yet the soil becoming rich in nitrogen. So again, the whole perspective of cake mix farming gardening is bring something in, add it, produce something and take it away. But the most important things I've found to do with my land are not the things that I add, but something that I do to it. Some cultural practice, improving the drainage, improving this or that, something which makes better use of what's already there. If you have a piece of land, you already have a great resource there. To assume that you've got to bring a whole lot of other stuff in to make it valuable may be flawed. You may be wasting, in fact, may even not be the best soil husbandry. Okay, she's asking, what about the concerns about adding wood ash because of metals? And the primary metals that are in there, the only metals of any quantity, are calcium, potassium, and magnesium. Those are metals, actually. They're light alkaline metals, and they're, of course, needed for the soil. Wood ash is very low. And I mean, if we're talking about, I don't know if you get some kind of industrial recycled, like creosoted fence posts or things like that, what might be in the ashes. But no, wood will not have a high level of metals or any kind of toxic stuff at all. What you may hear, and it's potentially also true, is it's overly alkaline. You know, they often say, like, you put so many tons of lime on, even if they don't need calcium. Because that's one of the concerns. Sometimes the extension guy will say, well, your pH is down to 5.2, you better do something to sweeten it. Well, lime is the obvious one. But sometimes the soil may be also very high in calcium already, but it's still acidic. So it's not just a chemical thing, it may be something about the drainage or sunlight or the compact structure of the soil or something. And those are cases where it's better to do something rather than add something. But that concern may be valid of getting two, because the pH of wood ash is much higher. It's that's why you get your hands in it when it's damp. Wash them really good pretty quickly, because they'll like burn your skin off. I mean, it's soapy and quite harsh. If your purpose is to neutralize the soil a little bit, wood ash is really ideal. It's quicker acting than lime. But what if your soil doesn't need that much pH raising, but does want those minerals? And you're concerned about getting the soil too alkaline. A little anecdote here. For years, we took all of our wood ashes from our stove, from burning wood, and used them to spread them on our various gardens. And after several years of doing that, we finally did the first soil test I'd done since I bought the land. A friend tested it and said our pH was like, I don't know, 7.4 or so, whatever. It was up to, like I said, you keep doing this, you're going to have to start growing sagebrush and forget about, tumbleweed. Tumbleweed will be the only thing growing in the garden. And he pointed out what you're doing is you're using the mineral product of, let's say, a few acres of woodlot and putting them all on our relatively small footprint. There's too much on too small a space. And so what can we do with it? We're generating the ash. We want those ashes, we want those minerals in the garden sooner or later, but not with the pH. So meanwhile, we have our hayfield, our pasture land, which we're not using livestock on. It's like in between the apple trees, and we're mowing it for the grass, for ourselves, to compost and mulch with. And you need to add something to that to keep it up. If you're taking away all the time, we have to lime it or something. Well, I didn't want to buy lime, so we were using the wood ashes in conjunction with some clover seed. The combination is very synergistic. The two together are more than the sum of the parts of them. Put that on a hayfield. Then we would get that potassium and all those minerals back in the form of grass. And so it would still end up in our compost bin, in our gardens, and in our tummies, but just organicized, and therefore neither too acidic or too alkaline. That's the only valid concern I've ever heard of about wood ash. And again, as you handle it, it is so alkaline that you want to be a little cautious, like if you're spreading it on a breezy day and breathe a lot of it. I mean, it's kind of harsh. It's lye.
It's lye. That's what they used to make soap.
Make soap, exactly, yeah.
Ash hopper and
that's right, and leach it. That's right. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very different thing from metal content, though. That's simply its pH, and there's nothing in there that's bad for the soil long term. It's just maybe momentarily bad for your lung lining and your fingertips and stuff like that. What about leaves from town, from your neighbors? It depends. Some people express a concern. The same thing with grass clippings from your neighbor. Some lawn care people. You get them to bring their grass clippings from out here. What about the chemical, heavy metal stuff that might be in them? With grass, I think that is conceivably an issue. Because grass is relatively, some people put all kinds of chemicals on, and it's fairly shallow rooted. It could be a concern. It used to be a much more concern of ours. We used to mow along our roadside back in the days of leaded gas. And my wife was very concerned about, particularly near an intersection or something where the exhaust is, that there might be some lead buildup there. I personally am skeptical of the seriousness of how much that is, but I don't know that. That's intuitive. And the same thing with grass. I'm pretty sure that leaves are getting almost all the stuff they're getting from way the hell down there. Okay, then what about evergreen things like pine needles, for example? Here's the concern with any kind of organic residue eventually evolves toward being slightly alkaline. Even pine needles. Pine needles, by the way, are quite high in calcium, disproportionate compared to most leaves, and yet they're acidic. The acids in them are mainly because of the resins that are in them. And the process of the soil, like working to digest those resins, creates a pH. Just like eating meat and greasy food, your stomach works so hard to digest it that it creates acidity. Even if the thing you ate was cream, let's say, or milk, something that was alkaline. Some things make our food, the pH of our body, our blood, alkaline or acidic, totally out of proportion to whatever the food itself is. And again, it's not the chemistry per se, it's something like, and so likewise, your soil is working to break down those pine needles. Ultimately, as it breaks down, it'll tend toward neutrality or slightly alkaline. Slightly acidic, which is what soil, most of our things want soil that is 6.5 or something like that. She's asking about, would add rock dust to this? And I would say, by all means, again, we're talking about an import, something off from the land. And so if it's there, let's say like gravestone, the people that cut and grind and polish sandblasting and stuff, stone, end up with the dust from it, particularly granite dust. Now, again, you can buy it if you're rich and have nothing more important to do and don't care about the footprint of your land. But if you're trying to keep within those, then yeah, if you come across something, if the neighbor house next door to you is being torn down, there's all this sheet rock is going to go to the landfill. That's gypsum, calcium sulfate. Well, why not use it, of course? But I'm very loath to buy or import something into the system that's already there. So in the case of rock dust, yeah, it's all those rock dusts that I know of are all just fine. They're fine to use. I guess my point is, how can I avoid using them unless they're there anyway or wasted anyway? But how can I keep your money in your wallet instead of going to the company
Well,
that...
it's free around here. You can just.
What's it
go
from?
pick it up
She
right
says
at
it's
the
free.
end
It's
of
free
the
around here.
quarry.
Oh, okay. So local quarry waste. That's kind of a no-brainer. Yeah, I see nothing whatever wrong with that. Yeah, that's good. Because otherwise, in other words, I always try to ask the question: am I robbing from Peter to pay Paul? He said, what part of the world did this come from? Why isn't it needed there again? We're trying to keep the cycle going. In your case, we're talking about something that otherwise we're not robbing Peter. There's no Peter. It's not like it was going to be serve some higher purpose where it was. So sure, yeah, get it. It's basically balance it with the carbon footprint of your labor and your gas, driving your car, loading it, bringing it home, that kind of stuff, and it probably stacks up pretty good in that. But factor those things into it. Yes.
So you were talking about the humus of the soil, and I was...
Humus. Yeah, I'm sorry. My hometown is a large Lebanese population, and they'd be very quick to correct you on that. Yeah.
The humus of the soil.
Hummus and tahini, they don't eat that.
So when you're putting the tahini in your soil...
Yeah.
But either later or now, could you elaborate more on like how tilling or how digging up the soil impacts?
Absolutely will. I will. Not right now, but we're heading that all the direction of all of those things. How much impact cultivation, stirring up the soil, what does that do to humus? Yeah. And it does some good things, but it does a lot of bad things. So yeah, let's again, you're getting down to how to. You must be getting antsy. You're all giving me specific how-to questions. I'm trying to stay up in La La Land here, and you're trying to bring me down to earth here. All the people I know, the hippies that go back to the land and give a few goats and some rabbits, and they think we're growing all our own food. Yeah, how much grain are you importing from, and all the stuff you need to keep those animals going? Is how you think you're so self-sufficient. Maybe compared to something, but you're still a support system. And so I don't try to tell them what they should do, just try to get them to make sure you're asking the right questions. Make sure when you're looking at your ledger, all your costs, the inputs and outputs, be sure you see the real bottom line. The bottom line is so often hidden, especially by the marketplace. And just incidentally, one of the best things that works for flea beetles is a rhubarb leaf extract, which I make. I haven't got to buy it from anywhere. You have some rhubarb, you eat the rhubarb, and you have the leaves, which you can't eat because they're toxic, because they're so full of oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is wonderful. Make a spray of it, make a fine spray on my young little seedlings of, let's say, broccoli or whatever, and it tends to bead up and run off really easy. So you do it on a nice, clear, sunny day, breezy day, nice laundry day. Make a very fine mist of it and let it dry. Come back maybe an hour or two later when it's dry, put another layer. Do it 3 times. And it'll end up with this little glaze that looks almost like frosted flakes or something. It's a little sugar-coated look to it. When you see that, you know they're safe. Flea beetles aren't going to... It's not going to kill the flea beetles. They just... Would you like to chewing on a cabbage that was coated with, ground up glass? It's like this. That's what it is for them. And it works very, very well. It only works for a couple of weeks. Eventually, I don't know what happens, it washes off, I suppose. By that point, flea beetles are really only an issue the very first, when they're so young and vulnerable. By that point, they outgrow the flea beetles. You make a little hole here or there, but not a serious problem. She wants details about how to make this rhubarb leaf extract. I can't keep you guys at bay anymore. You want details. You want specifics. We're going to go there. Time is on our side, so we can do that. What I do is, pick the rhubarb when it's ready, and particularly, usually I need it very early in the season when flea beetles come on. Very early mustard, turnip greens, and things like that. I'll pick it and strip off the leaves, and of course keep the stalk for freeze it or pie or whatever. Take the leaves, chop them up. I used to do it raw. I thought it was important, but I've learned since it's not important. Chop it up, and now I'll just boil it. and then pour off an extract. I used to beat it with a baseball bat or whatever, grind it up, and then put it in water and let it sit for a few hours in the hot sun. But don't even have to do that. Apparently it's not that heat labile or whatever, it's not destroyed. The boiling, I think, gets more, it concentrates it even more. Get that up, put it through a fine strainer, quite fine, cheesecloth, maybe fairly tight cloth. Cheesecloth probably wouldn't be enough. You get the stuff, you want only the soluble, as much as possible soluble minerals. You don't want the pectin and the other things that they'll just plug up. Put them in your sprayer, fine sprayer, and that's basically it. And it keeps for quite a while. I've had it sit around, bake a batch and have it a week later, have it still be good. Even though the stuff may have fermented and stuff like that, just restrain it so there's no fiber stuff in there. And it's really is as simple as that.
As many leaves as you can fit into the water.
Yeah, I don't know. I so more than I can use, so I make it real concentrated. I don't know how, no numbers. I don't know if there are any numbers. It works really, really good, very effective. Again, for as long as it needs to be. It probably, I'm sure how long it would last. Now you can make it, for a lot of these things, they have you use fish oil sticker to make it so it stays better. I don't use that because, again, I don't use fish. And I'm sure that would make it last longer, but my experience is it doesn't need to last long. It's quite water soluble, so I can imagine. It seems like I've had to go through one rain and seems to still be there, still working. But it wouldn't take much rain before it would carry it away. But by that point, again, it shouldn't be needed anymore. Either the rhubarb thing or Rime works very well. It's to strip the Rime over the row just for the first week or something until, as soon as possible. I don't like greenhouses. I don't like hoop houses. I don't like frames. They're fine for season extending. I want my things to be out in the air and the wind, and I want them to know what a flea beetle looks like, and maybe get a couple holes in them. Just like I don't want to go through life never having a cold. I just don't want to have one every week, and so I don't want one that kills me. So in other words, I like these things to have ambient conditions as much as possible. Normal temperature, normal rain, and normal pest pressure. I just need to do certain things to manage that pest pressure so I have something to put in my own tummy after. What can you use for fungicides? Things that you could use. The main one that I've got in mind, and it's the main one that I'm going to give you for almost all the other questions that you're asking, is humus. Because if you have a lot of humus in the soil, you'll have a lot of every other living thing, including other things that eat fungus. The bacteria, there are certain kinds of bacteria that are very active and you can buy them. You can send away to your laboratories where they give these hyperactive bacteria that will either eat other bacteria or eat fungi, and they'll keep the leaf surface. That's all great, but again, I don't want my gardening to depend that much on a laboratory somewhere else, and I'd like to have the thing within itself. So I'm offering this as a panacea, which is a little bit over the top, but only a bit. Highly active soil community with lots of humus into it. And that's why it's going to be very important as soon as we can. We want to get back to the idea of the ramial chips and leaves and stuff like that, because these will do what even green manures will not keep a high, sustainably long-lasting humus in the soil to make this outrageous community, this feverish activity of living things that will, among other things, deal with fungus, will deal with nematodes. There's other nematodes, naturally good nematodes that'll eat those nematodes. You can buy them and import them. And if you want, just for example, I know there's some company that's in Austria or Germany or somewhere, it's probably a biodynamic company, that you can get certain strains of bacteria culture that you could put, like in your compost, to make it heat up and break down a whole lot faster. Yeah, that's okay. I might do that once, maybe, but generally, unless I thought there's something about my area, my soil, my stuff, that is, I don't have to have the 10-speed bike. I can use a 3-speed for if there's bacteria doing the job already, they're probably as good as anything they got over in Germany. Again, I'm going to say, more than anything else, humus will be the antidote for the effects of acid rain, particularly like on a hilltop or something, where that's why in the Appalachians, like in the Blue Ridge Mountains, trees are dying. The further down, all the minerals that are leaching out from acid rain are leaching down to them. But if they're at the top of any kind of a crest of a ridge or something, everything is leaching away and they're left being acidic. So how do you deal with that? And so in effect, they're doing a couple of things here. One is, like I say, boosting the bacterial population by feeding them the minerals. That's good. The main thing it's doing, of course, is you're simply replacing minerals with other minerals. And again, that's just fine if your source of minerals is as sustainable as yours is. That's the kind of waste product that's not being used elsewhere. Always keep in mind, you can't do much about it. There's a whole lot of things you can't do anything about as an individual. These are social issues. Sustainable civilization is kind of, you can't really have sustainable agriculture until you have sustainable society. And Just for example, I use my own doo-doo on the land. Most of you probably can't. Either you have a septic field or you're in the city, it goes to the sewage plant, it gets composted, and it ends up probably on a golf course somewhere or a park or something. But you can't use it on your garden organically, not because of the poop. The pee and the poop and the toilet paper, those are the best parts of it. There's also some runoff, some antibiotics that someone threw down the toilet. There's some runoff oil and stuff from that parking lot. All the other things that go in there that you can't control. I can control mine. I know what goes down that hole. I control it. If you can't, so in a sense, the real culprit in terms of, now we're talking about another issue, but recycling of human manure. The real culprit here is the flush toilet.
That's right.
We can't control what everyone else puts in it, okay? So what do? It's a case of, you can't solve that problem. Society perhaps could give some thought to, is there some other way we can handle this stuff so that we can keep these bad things out of it? Then we'd all be fighting to, yeah, I want my shit back, please, yeah, give it, it's like, I'll buy it, give it, it's all composted, it's all sanitary and all that, great. But right now it is useless to us because of the way our technology. And so, again, to your example of the hilltop, is the real solution to that is to stop acid rain. Okay, so will you just do that tomorrow, start in the morning, stop acid rain, okay, it'll help me too, I'll pay you a little bit to do it. See, these are not problems that can be dealt with at an individual level. It can't be dealt with at a community level. It's hard for the state of New York to deal with it. It's mostly coming from Ohio or something anyway. So these are things that our whole civilization has got to look at being more. So if you thought you had enough work on your plate trying to make your garden more organic, no, you got to make your planet more organic. She's asking, what about compost tea? Well, if I were to use compost tea, I wouldn't hesitate to, nothing wrong with using compost tea. It would only be as a foliar application because of the bacteria, fungus stuff that are in it. It might be good to have, if your compost is properly made. Using compost tea actually could be a Pandora's box of diseases and inoculating it with bad stuff. But properly made compost is fine that way. Just don't think of it primarily as a fertilizer. Because for one thing, it's a soluble fertilizer. So the humus, when you strain it or whatever to make compost tea, you're getting rid of a very important part of it, which is the humus, did I say? And putting the soluble stuff. We might as well use Miracle Grow. It's almost comparable. Well, no, it's an exaggeration, but it's maybe as a sort of like almost as a natural antibiotic or something. Yeah, for that way, great. Yeah. Again, always look behind the problem. It's what's causing the problem in the first place. Because maybe some reason, something else that's wrong, and you're taking penicillin for a disease that you shouldn't have caught in the first place. So you always want to look behind this. What is our underlying problem? Yeah, and sometimes that may be impossible or impractical to deal with. So then we get out the compost tea by all means. And she's saying basically, if other parts of the world, I don't think I can even paraphrase it well, are producing all of these things, and how are they impacted by climate change? And what can I or we or they do about it? This is particularly an important point insofar as I am even a little, most of you are very much at the global marketplace. Your food, your orange juice comes from somewhere else, your this and that, your papaya comes from somewhere else. The more sophisticated we become as vegans, instead of just eating, instead of having meat and potatoes, having potatoes, or beans or peas or stuff. Instead, we've gotten used to all these ethnic things. All the stuff we're having for lunch today, from what I noticed, curry powder and all these ethnic, hummus tahini. And these are all really, really cool foods. A lot of them are very exotic, although an awful lot of them can be grown here. It could be grown in your own garden, but they aren't being grown here. So we've gotten a very exotic and a very large food shed, which in many ways is very good. Because that means, let's say if the soil in the Ithaca area of New York is just really low in boron, and just is. Well, maybe the tempeh that we're getting in that's maybe from let's say some Illinois soybeans or something, that may have it in it. In other words, all these different things coming from different places can help us that way. But again, they're having the same issues. They're having the same soil, especially with imperialist agriculture, with these other societies that have, basically they have commodity crops they're producing for Europe and the United States, and North America basically. And in the process, they're doing the same thing. The marketplace is their form of erosion. So they're losing particularly minerals to those things. The simple answer to it is to what extent the climate change affecting how we do things absolutely is. Up until 20, 30 years ago, it was really almost impossible for me to grow any kind of melons in my place, musk melons, to ripen them. If I started plants that I'm real early and did a bunch, put black plastic, which I won't use because it doesn't grow on my land and it's made of dinosaur farts. But that's about the only way, or some F1 hybrids, which we won't have time, I don't think, much today to talk about seed saving. But if you want to save your own seeds, then F1 hybrid seed is useless. It's no good at all. You should avoid, and there's all kinds of reasons why you should avoid even buying it, even if you don't intend to save your own seeds. And so it was almost impossible to do that. Nowadays, see, I don't live in Industry, Maine anymore. I'm somewhere in northern Pennsylvania. You guys don't live in southern, you're down around North Carolina about now. You know, that's where global warming is moving us hundreds of miles south. So there's quite a lot of things that I can grow quite easily that, like I say, originally, southern Maine maybe. But now I can grow them pretty much without black plastic, without this or that. Sustainability. Not even talking about agriculture. Sustainable, it's about this business being sustainable, or we basically mean long-term viability. And to me, the hallmarks, the key defining features of sustainability are, number one, is you can sustain it. In other words, it can go on till hell freezes over, or till the sun burns out, or whatever. It can go on indefinitely, and that it has the wherewithal to generate itself. So it, again, it is not relying on inputs. We can do it on and on. That's really big, and it's the same thing with the business. You know, what is the bottom line? And we find out there are such things in accounting called externalities. You know, there are certain things we say, oh, this is making some money. Well, this nuclear power plant is giving us really cheap electricity. Well, but when the thing is got to be decommissioned after we have to have a few more $1 billion to do that, all of a sudden that gets factored in, or the harm it did to innocent bystanders, to wildlife, to the environment, or whatever. If we measured that in, if we somehow could put a number value on that, then this stuff would have been a lot more pricey. And I submit to you that animal foods are very, very expensive, far more. It's for one thing, it's highly subsidized. I mean, you're paying for other people's ability to afford meat. The USDA, all the subsidies we have to, for example, corn production and livestock production, there's all kinds of taxpayers' money that goes to prop this up, to make a system work that is inherently unworkable, or at least unsustainable. So yeah, and a question that I'm often asked and trying to answer myself is, who does this work for? What about people in third world countries? What about people in areas, let's say in marginal, like, let's say Nebraska or something? They will come to me saying, well, this is, you know, short grass prairie, it's half desert, you know, nothing else would grow here except these Herefords or Longhorns or whatever, you know. And I have a vision about that. I don't know anyone that has experience with it, so it basically is a vision. In fact, by the way, another book which I didn't bring with me, probably should have, that I wrote a few years ago. It's actually a fiction. It's an eco-novel of a futuristic society called Hesperia. And it's called Through the Eyes of a Stranger. You can buy it online, or you can actually buy it from me. I should have brought some with me. And the sequel to it, which I've just finished, in the process of finishing, I'm hoping to get it published within a year. But it serves kind of as a paradigm for discussing this issue. It's about this mythic society and how they do things. And among other things, this Hesperia is vegan, and they're highly sustainable. This is not a utopia. This is a society. The people and the society have warts. They have imperfection. They have flaws. They screw up on certain things. But because they are sustainable, as we are not, because they are sustainable, they can frig up and try again to get it right. And as they solve that problem, each problem, I have this philosophy, every problem begets solutions, and every solution begets problems. And that, friends, is the definition of evolution of life, is you solve one problem, it creates others, and so forth. And that's wonderful. That's great. That's what keeps this thing constantly generating, unrolling, always changing. And anyway, so Hesperia serves as a kind of a case example of several things. But Hesperia essentially is modeled after my area of Western Maine, for example. And so it doesn't serve us for this present purpose. Some guy out in Western Nebraska says, I can only, cattle is the only thing that would grow here. For one thing, keep in mind that cattle don't really well grow there. If it takes 100 acres for one head at one steer, then that's pretty damned inefficient to begin with. So you say, well, how could a plant-based diet work out there at all? You need irrigation, you have so little water. Well, they're pumping water from the Ogallala aquifer right now to feed the cattle. It would take a fraction of that, less than 10% of it, to irrigate crops if they're going to do that. Irrigation always has the problem of creating deserts, salt, mineral buildups. One of the remedies to that is mulching. In fact, any really sustainable food system should not have chronically bare dirt. I am not particularly prudish about my person, but I have this concern that Mother Earth should, I think of the process of things. Some people think this is really sweet, some people think it's gross. But the idea of soil bringing forth crops is sort of like a woman in labor, okay? And to have this bare, so it's kind of like ogling a woman who's bringing forth, saying, that's not cool. No, have a nice private blanket, a warm protection on it. And the Mother Earth bringing forth life should be a nice private blanket of mulch of some kind. So I'm not into permanent mulch. We can go there later, but because it might be ideal in some ways, but I find it too problematic for most things. But anyway, having the soil covered as early as possible in the season, as much of the season as possible. That, in fact, is also a significant part of our fertility program. That mulch will all turn into compost, or it'll build the soil building material. But anyway, so we're out in Nebraska. How do we do this? Well, there's grass to be cut out there, sparse. It'll take 10 acres to get what you would get from 1 acre of nice New York hay pasture. So in other words, it will support less livestock per acre. It'll support less plants, food plants per acre. It'll support less humans per acre. That's fine. But let's make sure we're comparing those internally. We're comparing apples and oranges. Don't try to compare how many people could live veganically in Nebraska to how many people could live on a dairy farm in New York and so forth. Those are false analogies, and we've got to be careful that we avoid them. Probably even some fairly extreme deserts could produce food crops for, certainly like an oasis or something. That's what they're doing right now, badly. And the veganic system would allow us to do those things much more efficiently. So this basic principle could be applied, the principle could be applied anywhere that people can live and grow food of any kind, animal or anything. Whether the details work as well somewhere else. For example, as I've pointed out at some length, and we're going to go into this very soon very deeply, using of forest residues. Leaves and ramial chips and stuff like that. Works great for me, works great for you, not so well out in Nebraska, okay? So they're basically tied to it's a natural grass ecosystem, so grass is going to be the center of their fertility buildup. It was under nature, it's going to be under their modified nature. Again, comparing, not trying to compare apples and oranges. It reminds me of a little anecdote. Several years ago, I was contacted by a French guy who was living in Jamaica. And he was a vegan, and not a very realistic vegan. He was like some of you might be, but you're not anymore because you've been here. Now you're realistic, but he was not. Anyway, he had this great brainstorm. He was living in the highlands, this inland area of Jamaica, what they call a cockpit country, where there are people that live there called the Maroons, and they're basically descendants of runaway slaves. They lived very isolated, highly self-sufficient, and basically having little to do with the lowland Jamaicans who are producing commodity crops for the rest of the first world countries and stuff like that. Anyway, this guy's concern, what was his name? Fabrice. He said he wanted these people who were very poor, and he would like them to be producing crops for export, but mainly veganically. He'd only discovered this thing about veganically. And he had some really wacko ideas. He didn't quite understand what veganic was, frankly, but I told him to begin with, I think, to get these people out of poverty, the first thing is you want to tie them in more to the marketplace, which makes them poor already. So I think what they really need, and both in this book and in my novel, I refer a lot to usual organic farming, market gardening, is basically searching for a nicer path to the marketplace. Insofar as that's good. But what I am trying to do at my farm, and many of you who are not looking at market gardening, I'm trying to find nicer paths that lead away from the marketplace. And I'm suggesting that these poor people in Jamaica, all their food is mostly all imported. They can grow anything there. This is Jamaica. They can grow all kinds of, but most of their food is imported. So what's with that? And he's saying, so we want to start producing some crops to export. And I'm saying maybe, and mainly he's thinking of to Britain and to Europe, where all these vegan bunny huggers, they'd be happy to buy their nutmeg and their clove will be veganically grown instead. Okay, that's cool. But maybe the first priority should be to make these Jamaicans, these Maroons, more food independent themselves. And I've always said this about myself. My highest priority, the most profitable thing I can do with any food that I grow is to eat it. I don't pay income taxes on selling it. I don't pay the marketplace to handle it. And I don't, on the other hand, buy food and pay taxes on the food I buy. Well, no, we don't tax food. But anyway, I save in so many ways by producing it. And so market gardening is not my focus at all. If one has to do market gardening, then there are certain ways of doing it that can make it a lot better, a lot less unsustainable. But this is an issue to deal with. So anyway, I was first of all questioning his thing about growing anything for the market anywhere, even a niche European vegan market. And he kind of got that, but he kind of didn't get it. And then he came up with ideas. He said, okay, there's all kinds of stuff here there's not a lot of grass here, but there's all kinds of vegetation they can cut. And they don't have chipper shredders like I did, and they can't afford them. I said, well, for the time being, one thing they can do is take machetes. They have machetes. Chop this stuff up somewhat. And what are we going to make the compost bins out of? Again, he didn't know much about green. People tend to assume that if you're organic gardening, you have to make compost. I do. I make lots of compost. It's very important, a very important aspect of what I do. But it's actually probably the secondary part of what I do. Green manuring is, I'd say, if anything, and becoming a bigger part of it. So, okay, so they're going to make compost, all right. What are we going to make the bins out of? I suppose we could make them out of cement blocks, but that's very expensive here because it's all imported. Yeah, forget about cement blocks. Well, what do you have I use poles, beams and stuff. Well, there's this kind of tree that grows very, very fast here, but the problem is it rots. Like in a year, this kind of worm that gets into it, and it rots in a year or two. So we don't want that. We don't have anything in our compost bin rotting, do we? No. I still fine. If it lasts for a year or two, and then you take it, chop it up, and put it in the compost bin, that's the point. I couldn't make this guy get out. He was basically trying to work against nature. We're going to we'll get some grant for somewhere to get some cement blocks made in the United States or something to be imported to make these compost bins that'll last forever. And I pointed out to him, compost bins perhaps shouldn't last forever, particularly the kind you're talking about. The compost bin should eventually become part of the compost. And things like that. So the basic idea I was very much behind. I was trying to do what I could he wanted me to come down there actually to consult with them, to get these people to grow veganic food. But my focus was far more on for them growing it for themselves and for sale within Haiti, within Jamaica, if not for their own use, the local market. Let these bunny huggers off in Britain take care of their own food. If there's something that's really profitable, really good money, if they're willing to pay the price for this happy, compassionately grown spices and herbs and tropical foods, that's great. That's great. But trying to enslave yourself to the marketplace, which they're already enslaved to, do we want to just keep going in that same direction? That sort of related to the stuff you were talking about before, but how this will work in other countries, other societies, or does it? She asks, would I see it as ideal, therefore, that we would not eat bananas here, or have orange juice, or orange juice, or cinnamon, and so on. Let me tell you something very briefly about the land of Hesperia. I'm going there. I really am. In the land of my fictitious novel, Hesperia, they have something called the vine laws there, which basically mandate a high level of self-sufficiency, of self-reliance for every household, not even town or region, but even household, which in this case, since they are communal residences, they're not just nuclear families, but 30 or 40 people, let's say, all live at this stead, they call them, the homestead. And every stead is supposed to be self-reliant, according to the vine laws, for their staple foods and their domestic fuel, whether it's firewood or lamp fuel or whatever. So that doesn't mean they can't have oranges or dates or figs and so on, but their staple foods, they have to basically account for them. So they're producing their own grain, their own fruit, their own oil seeds and so forth, their own juice. If we were like that here, we would have orange juice more or less whenever we wanted it. Whenever we could afford it, because apple cider would be so much cheaper. That's right here, we got that for free almost. So we would have apple cider, we'd have apples all the time. And occasionally, like when I was a kid, it was a treat in the Christmas stocking, a nice big, orange, and a bag of figs. My dad was big on figs. We always knew what we'd get him. Mom, persimmons. No, pomegranates. She loved pomegranates. We probably could have had them any time of year, but they were kind of a special treat we had then. And so I'm not suggesting that we not have a global marketplace, including food, but it works better, and this is not just for food. This self-reliance works better. The great paradox in Hesperia is because they ostensibly are claimed not being a market-based economy. They're largely based on a very high level of self-sufficiency, and what marketing is done, food or otherwise, is largely a barter economy. The Hesperian government does not mint currency or mint money. Nothing to stop you from using it. It's kind of like if we didn't have US dollars, the government did do it. But you were allowed to, just for convenience, if we wanted to use pesos or euros or something, we can. But no one guarantees the value of it. So we probably would use those things, but we would probably, because of the complexity of currency exchange and stuff, we'd probably rely more on direct barter and use these things to make up differences. It'd be convenient to use money. So because they have that in Hesperia, the great paradox there is because Hesperians are so self-reliant for their basic needs, what they do sell they have the, I guess you might say, the luxury of, they can demand a fair deal. If you're growing one commodity, if you're a Midwestern farmer, you're growing corn and soybeans, you have no control over the price of your hybrid GMO seed. You have no control over the price of your fertilizer, very little control over any of the inputs, the gasoline in your factory. You have no control over any of it. Then you produce a crop and you turn around and sell it. You have really no control over that. It's whatever the current commodities market is supplying. So you're really sucking hind tit all the way. You don't have any control over your livelihood. And so, therefore, your farm belt farmers are going out of business, committing suicide, or whatever, they're losing their land. Those same farmers, by the way, the wife goes into the market and she brings home a loaf of bread and she buys milk and she whatever, so there's no level of self-sufficiency at all. And that's the very thing that the Asparian type of system avoids, is if you do buy something they've got somewhere else, or if I'm producing something for the market, but I don't absolutely have to sell it, then don't think you're going to pull me down to a rock bottom price. I can sell it at a fair price. You, on the other hand, are relatively self-reliant. I can't gouge you either. You don't have to have it. So the extent to which our marketplace participation is optional, this is the great paradox, makes it better for everyone. It means you can get you can't screw me down on the price, but I can't make it outrageous to you. It's both a buyer's and a seller's market. And so there the paradox is, because Asparia, therefore, is a thriving economy. Beyond the market economy, there's also the subsistence and the barter economy. They also produce a lot of high-quality products that are exported to other countries. They're like a powerhouse. And there's a river of exports coming out of this country. And it's quite profitable. They're not exporting any, like, their main trade partner is Anagaya, which is a little bit south of it. It's kind of more or less the southeastern United States, where they're an export commodity based on, but largely on one commodity, cotton. And also a few other things, tobacco and sweet potatoes and so on. And because of that, the peasants are all terribly poor. They produce one thing, they buy everything else. So this basically has little to do with veganic, has more to do with self-reliance at whatever level. And again, veganic helps you to be more self-reliant. The other really important part of this is, okay, Amie's got, would you say 9 acres or something here? As a working farm, that's piss poor, that's nothing. What's she going to produce on 9 acres by conventional, if she wanted to market stuff? Well, particularly by not only veganic methods, but also intensive methods, which we're going to go to. We have a lot to say about that. The book deals a lot with that. She could get at least 3 or 4 times the amount of saleable produce from that land, beyond what she grows for her own use. So the veganic side lets us get much more, feed a lot more people, whether it's us or someone in the marketplace, from the same size footprint. A very important aspect of it. She's saying, given that let's say she is a market gardener. She's not mainly producing stuff for her own use. She's got to sell this stuff. She's committed to and hopefully making a decent living at it. How can she do that? Well, trying to, hoping to, aspiring to. Well, that's part of the problem. But she's not. It's not doing it. She should be able to. Otherwise, why the heck do it? Why not find something? Maybe be healthcare. This way we can make lots of money in the healthcare business. That's the only thing nowadays in the country. The biggest growing sector is healthcare. So we're also sick. But you're trying to do something and have it hopefully be profitable. And she wants to be sustainable. So she's very sensitive, and rightly so, and to her credit, to this comment I made about the fact that whether she buys in minerals or uses the minerals from the piece, because she's selling them away. She's becoming a form of erosion. For her, the marketplace is, how can she minimize that? In some ways, you can't. But there are definitely some things you can do to improve it a whole lot. And the point that I was making before about, okay, you may have to import some minerals, but currently you're not making as much use as you could of the minerals you've got, especially those that are way the hell down there. So insofar as, do you have any woods on your land, much trees?
Lots of them.
There you go. Those are bringing up a lot of those minerals that you're buying in now from Fedco or whatever, some trace mineral supply, all those little, boron and stuff. Oops, I gotta shut this off, it's lost power. I shouldn't have it on now anyway. The more that you can use, for you, this is written all over you. This ray meal chips, and particularly leaves, tree leaves. Whether they come from your land or the town of Ithaca can bring them out to you, sometimes you can work out deals with the local community. They're very happy to bring them out to your place instead of going to the landfill. Those things have got those minerals in them in spades. They got tons of the most minor trace mineral. They've got pandemonium in them. The stuff you buy from somewhere, and California and berkelium and whatever, ruthenium. Those are in there. If plants need them or not, if plants need them, then the maple tree took them up. And in approximately the proportion that the maple tree needed, which is more or less transferable to most other land plants. So the things in your crop. So to some extent, making better use. Now you might say, in this guy, we robbing from Peter and paying Paul any more than her minerals from the quarry? Those things are down there where the glacier dropped them. They would never, ever become part of the biosphere except for this sustainable mining. These big old hardwood trees reaching down there, they alone can get them. Your cabbage can't reach down and get it. Your soybeans won't get it. But they'll reach down and bring them up to there. So that's the biggest thing I can think of that you can do. You can also not simply deal with your farm, your individual, as a particular unit, but look as its place in the community. There's all kinds of other crap in the community that's going to waste, other than not even animal manure, but things that grass clippings, and get in touch with the local your local landscaping and lawn care people, and see if they'll bring you their some of this stuff. Yeah. And typically the stuff tends to be free. You have to buy all those minerals you bring in, all those amendments you get from companies. These things tend to be free. In some cases, you get paid for taking them away. Every fall, I've got 80 acres or so of hardwood forest. I don't get most of my leaves from my own woodlot. I could. Anytime I could get them from there. It's easier for me to take my little truck and my car and my little trailer hitch and my little utility trailer, go into town. I can bring about almost a ton per load. And I'm raking them off from the roadside from people's lawns, where they're going to go to the landfill anyway. And it's easier and quicker to get them, even though I have to use a little gasoline going back and forth to town. But that's something it's otherwise a waste product, and leave my woods, the ones in the woods, there for the woods. But at any point, I could get them from my own woods.
Do you shred them?
And I do shred them. Let's go there for a little bit, at least when we're ready to. We got all these details about oak leaves and all this kind of stuff. This is a very big thing, and let's go there. Even for veganic intensive methods, I think any suburb, maybe some very wealthy suburb where they have huge, big, manicured estates, and obviously they're not going to put that into cabbage, but at least not that kind of cabbage. So no, you're saying, can a suburban area be self-reliant, sustainably self-reliant? And I'm quite sure not. Even by the most intensive veganic method, you get a lot closer to it. But I think you need a certain amount of acres per a family would need. Maybe only 2 acres or something. But still, most suburban lots are not quite big enough to do that. And some trees, some woods, a lot of places to mow. By the way, when I first started, got into I'd hardly been on my farm very long when I started learning about intensive and French intensive and raised beds and all that stuff, which, by the way, I hate raised beds. I like intensive beds, the intensive spacing, but raised, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense to me. We tried it one year and flattened them right out. Some people swear by raised beds. We swear at them. They're just a lousy idea. And we see a lot of pride, and nothing natural about it. The only place where I would make a raised bed, and did in effect, is one part of our land. There's this area where it's now in blueberries for all I had in crops, and it was so the drainage was really bad there. And ultimately, what I did is made a very deep ditch around the whole thing, and threw all that dirt onto it, so it's like a little mini mesa kind of a thing. It makes it about 4 inches higher than it used to be, and the water table a little bit lower because of the ditch. In effect, that's one big raised bed, sort of. She's saying, what's the downside of the raised beds? And one was the work of making them, although some people have, like a bed shaping, a tractor attachment that does them. Most people I know use planking or something like that. I mean, why use a lot of extraneous material, bought or from my own land or whatever, to shape these things? And if you have them like steep slope sides, then you have quite a lot of wasted space there. The whole point in beds is to make intensive use of the space. And instead of wasting a lot of space, the main reason we put things 2 or 3 feet apart is either for our vrooms that need that space, a rototiller tractor, whatever, it has to have that room. Or even if that's not an issue, is our little feet. You have to have room to walk in among these to cultivate them. The crop themselves generally does not need that space. They can usually be much closer than they are. And now that's a piece, we're going to hold off on that a little bit, but intensive methods. And beds, the raised beds actually militates against that, in my experience. Just the space you have for the logs or the cement blocks or the planking or whatever, that space alone, you've got an edge effect there, which is problematic to maintain. She's saying, what about raised beds as a way of repelling little animals? And I don't see it. It's got to be a really high thing with stainless steel sides or something that a little animal can't either crawl up over it or crawl under it or something. I don't think that works a bit from my experience. I've known a few people who do it because they're handicapped. If you're wheelchair bound or something like that, have really high beds, like bins. And yeah, that makes sense. But we're talking about an ultra niche garden there. This is gardens more for therapy than for food production, and that's okay. But as a realistic method, I don't see it. That's the main case where it'd be justified. What if you have a little or no topsoil to begin with? And like some people in the next town over from me, I recommended raised beds for them. Because they've got essentially no soil. There's this ledge. They're put a garden on a friggin' ledge. What are they going to do with that? And there's no soil. They have to bring the soil in. And so in that case, you're going to need really raised beds. And even then, forget about parsnips. And carrots are going to be kind of this grow stubby type of carrot varieties. And it's going to be very drought prone because there's no the capillary action. There's no. So yeah, there are some extreme cases perhaps where raised beds would be, but generally my experience is they don't make sense. They're not worth it. And if anything, there's the con is they tend to dry out too much. Seeds, we didn't have ours raised by planks. We had them like steep-sided like that. And the soil washed down, the seeds washed out. We couldn't see any point. And that meant, therefore, that space was essentially lost. My friend and distant cousin Tom his beds are not raised. He's very careful to never step in the beds, which I'm fairly careful about that. But occasionally, my beds are 4.5 feet wide. And the path is only 1.5 feet. And what I like about that, most other people don't like it, especially people with shorter arms. It's harder to reach in. They want only 2.5, 3 foot beds. Well, the reason I'm so obsessive about it is a big part of the point in this is to have a smaller percentage of my footprint tied up for my access. So I want my path to be as small as I can in proportion to the bed. So my beds are all 6 feet between centers. Okay, these are all typical beds. If this is a bed right here, this is the center line. It's 6 feet between, this looks like it's raised. That peak is just to show you to make it easy to see. But from the middle of this path to the middle of this path, or from the center of this bed to the center of that bed is 6 feet. Of that, 1.5 feet, 18 inches is the path. 52 inches or 4.5 feet is the bed. So that means only 25% of my land is tied up in access. Most people have at least a third of their land tied up, and sometimes quite a lot more than that. Sometimes these raised beds at a distance, if you stop and look at them and look at the numbers and do some measurements, you'll find that they may be better than just conventional wide row spacing, but there's a lot of land still tied up in either the path or if they're raised beds of this side, is keeping it all together. What do I use to starting my seeds since I'm not buying a potting soil imported mix? It's the 2/3 for every, what I do is I take 2 buckets of vegan compost, nicely matured veganic compost, which basically is leaves and grass and garden residues and weeds.
2/3?
In other words, 2/3. So in other words, for 3 buckets of potting soil, 2 buckets of this soil, which I put through a 1/4-inch screen, so it's pretty fine. And I mix that with, this is imported, it doesn't have to be, but I use a bucket of peat moss. And I'll put that through and mix them up together for more humus. I'm very sure I could do it with pure, because my compost is nothing but humus. I think it would probably work fine. I've even done it before with no peat moss at all. Just pure, nothing but compost. And I don't add blood meal, all those various things to it, and I don't add vermiculite to it. She's saying, the idea of putting a little dusting of sphagnum moss, or peat moss, on the surface to partly as a mulch, I suppose.
No, it's more just really about damping off.
Okay, as far as damping off goes. Yeah, there are other solutions. There are other ways of avoiding damping off in the first place, but there's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I mean, again, okay, you're importing some peat moss from either Nova Scotia or Louisiana or something. You're importing maybe 100 pounds for this year. Whee! Wow! So you're not being totally self-reliant. You're not boiling your own salt from seawater. It's totally different from using tons of compost per acre on your market garden or whatever. That's a very, very different thing, because it's a mined product. You might say it's fossil humus. It's basically, it's on its way to becoming coal or lignite or maybe someday a diamond or something, but for the time being, it's just humus. And so for the amount I'd say go ahead and do it. I'm not sure how important it is to do it. I'm just saying it's not important at all not to do it, but I'm not sure you need to. Damping off is caused by something, particularly, of course, overwatering and cold. Yeah, temperature. Make sure it's not too chilly, because that's the very things that encourage fungal action as opposed to bacterial action. And the fungus, the damping off is fungal.
What's too chilly?
What is too chilly? geez, you talk about numbers, you guys. I don't do numbers. Somewhere above freezing, but below. No, I mean,
Because I have problems with damp off, so.
well, you're doing these in a greenhouse, right?
Could you
Or
repeat
not?
the question
Under
and
lights.
say what damp off is?
Yeah, you're damping off, which is a fungal, a kind of a rot that particularly vulnerable, plants particularly are vulnerable to it at the soil line. That's where, like tomatoes, all of a sudden they get shrunk in there and they fall over. Okay. She says she has tons of damping off. Are you growing your plants in a greenhouse of some kind?
No, I use under lights is where I have the problem. Probably there's not enough light.
That very, very likely, yeah. And it's hard even with lights to get the amount of not only enough UV, but the blend of light that natural sunlight is. I don't have experience with that, so I'm not giving you information. I'm giving you opinions.
And air circulation.
And air circulation. Where you have them under lights may not be enough air moving around. So these things, even though you have to put them in a special cloistered environment for right now, because they're not happy outdoors yet. Okay, you got to put them in, but you would like that to be as much like outdoors as possible. So you're asking the temperature, like what temperature is it when you usually put them out? You know, maybe hopefully not below 55 at night or something, 60, 70 degrees. So that's what you'd like to aim at. You get much colder than that, especially chronically colder than that, then you got the conditions to promote any kind of fungal disease, but particularly damping off. Just incidentally, if you save your own seeds, but this is particularly relevant with tomato seeds, which is the main, when people do get into seed saving, at the entry level, they usually start off with tomatoes because they're the easiest one to do, which is great. If you take a tomato, a nice ripe tomato, you cut it in half through the equator, you squeeze the seeds out, now you've got the other seeds, okay? And you dry them and store and plant them out. Wrong problem already here. When they come out, they have those little like frog's egg, little amnions every seed has around it. Yeah, that is a harbor for damping off and other diseases too. You want to get rid of that. If you save them that way, put them in a paper towel and dry them out and plant them next spring, they'll probably germinate just fine, but you'll have a very great increase in damping off. The main way to get rid of, and also if you want to store them for several years, So you want to get rid of that little amnion. We're not doing a seed saving class today, but this little bit I'll give you. If you're saving your own tomato seeds, you want to get rid of that. And the simplest way of doing it is by fermentation. You squeeze those seeds of the tomato guts, I call them, into a Dixie cup or a bowl, whatever, however much you got. Let it sit there for 2, 3, 4 days. You want to basically sit there until it breaks down. Someone always asks me, how do I know when it's enough? And your significant other will say, get that stuff the hell out of here. Okay? People will tell you, fruit flies flying around it, you know. If it has a little bit of mold on it, that's not the end of the world. It's a sign that it's time to get it now if there's mold, but the mold won't hurt it. And so that means the stuff has started to break down. And now you take it and put it in a glass jar, a bigger container like a fruit juice jar or something or other. Add a much larger quantity of water to it. Slush it around real good, slur it around. And as you spin it around like this, you see all this sludge going around, and you see this happens. Some stuff goes to all that pulpy, crappy, the mold and the fermented stuff, all goes to the top and floats there. And the good solid seeds, basically, because they're dense, go to the bottom. Okay, and then you pour that top stuff off. Don't be anal at this. So just get maybe half of it off. Get the bulk of it off. There's still a lot left. Add more water. Fill it up. Every time you fill it up, the water, the whatever we call it, the cruddy, pulpy water there is less dense because you've added water to it. It's thinner. Therefore, the seeds sink better. What?
1 more minute.
Oh, before we, okay. The seeds will go to the bottom more, and the crap will go to, eventually you get clear water. You pour those seeds off and put them on a towel and dampen them that way. So that's one of the ways of avoiding damping off in your system. But tomatoes and beans are among the most popular, and for logical reasons, the two to start with. Eventually, hope you move on to things that need to have pollination control or biennials that have to be overwintered for the next year. But tomatoes and beans, that's the place to start, where people usually start, and for good reason. They're self-pollinating. Most of them don't cross. And you plant it in the spring, harvest the seed in the winter, in the fall, go to Aruba for the winter, you're all set. You know, that's. So then, other questions that we were in the middle of or whatever, let's just take off with those again after. Keep them in mind. few questions that you've had, some that we covered a little this morning, but wanted to go into much more detail about, particularly stuff connecting to the ray meal, the tree crops and leaves and stuff. And also several of you have asked me about different, what I call trips. Permaculture, biodynamic, roof stout, no-till, all these kinds of things. And let's talk a little about those things and anything else that I'm forgetting. But the basic thing is the how-to. If I told you how wonderful, this woody forest residue is, because it's so eco-efficient and all that, and the more we can eat indirectly from the forest, well, how do you do that? Because, you don't just take a bunch of chips and plow them under or sawdust, and there you go, great crops. Most of the research in this area was done, curiously enough, by a couple of a couple of Quebec foresters who were not vegans, were not organic farmers, not interested in sustainable, not interested in permaculture per se. They had this very curious situation where they were looking at the townships of eastern Quebec, where you have this juxtaposition of fairly large industrial type farms, mainly producing barley and oats and grain and feedlots, hog lots and stuff like that. Large scale farms, and on the other hand, in among them, a kind of a patchwork quilt of forests, particularly hardwood woodlots, much of it being sap birth, rock maple for syrup production. And of course, the lumbering in all these forested areas produces lots of residue and slash, which conventionally forests just leave behind, and it's a little problematic. It's aesthetically, and it can be a fire hazard and whatever. It can cause some problems. But anyway, it occurred to them: is there some way we could use these materials for the nearby agricultural land? Can we somehow parlay maple leaves and chips and twigs and stuff into oats and barley? And they did a lot of research over several years, and they've come up with some very interesting conclusions. But the implications are far beyond what they were looking at. They're more what we're looking at. Here can we take this very eco-efficient material and turn it into something that plant food that we'd like very much to eat. Among other things, I don't know if I can get these in particular order. One of the things that some people have suggested, in the beginning, I thought this myself. If you're doing this, wouldn't it be really ideal if you cut those trees or brush or whatever you're doing it in the summertime when they're all green leaves, right? That would, obviously, since stuff is too low in nitrogen, this would help to compensate a little, wouldn't it? They say no. There'd be something for the bacteria to work on to generate, heat and so on. They say, well, for one thing, we're not looking at bacteria to do the work. Organic people generally focus a lot on bacteria, and these guys said we're looking at molds, particularly blue molds. We're looking at fungal decay. And again, organic people don't tend to think enough about fungus, soil fungi, the beneficial effects. We tend to look at the bacteria all the time. So they say it's a problem. You'd best if you don't cut them when they're green with the green leaves. It will encourage some nitrogen, some bacteria, which will just get in the way. They will impede, they will interfere with the fungal growth. You really want them very late in the season when the leaves are all fallen, preferably like now. They say it would be actually before now, it's too late now. And like late in the winter, take this stuff and chip it up. Nothing bigger than, they say 3 inches. I say nothing bigger than a broomstick. I mean, if anything's bigger than a broomstick, I should be using it for firewood or something, or some higher use. But anyway, chip it up, and not like sawdust, like chips, like the road crews, when they were feeding the stuff into those things. And they would have you definitely don't plow it under. All those things that someone just mentioned. It makes them very resistant to breaking down, causes nitrogen deficiency, screws up the pH. That's no good. And Mother Nature doesn't do it that way. Mother Nature doesn't bury wood. It all rots, it falls on the surface. So they would have us chip this stuff up, put in a layer like inch or 2 deep or whatever on your land, and leave it there, like over the winter. And for it to what? It was freezing snow on the surface of the ground with 3 feet of snow on top of it. What's going to happen to this stuff? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. Bacteria does nothing. The bacteria, even if they're there, they basically insist, by which I mean not that they demand getting their way. By insist, I mean they form cysts, they go dormant. It's just a fancy biological word for they go bye-bye till springtime. Yeah. And so they're very insistent on insisting. But white molds, on the other hand, apparently can keep on not only living, but being fairly active at temperatures below freezing. So all these chips are under the soil, on top of the garden. The white molds in the soil, they'll permeate, or they'll spread through all the little hyphae, the little fungus roots will spread all through this stuff. And by springtime, these chips will have, no, not decayed, not broken down, no, but they will be somehow transformed. They'll be turned basically grayish, blackish, kind of grayish charcoal color. And it'll be all full of these mycelia, of these molds. And they will be transformed in a certain way. These cell walls will have begun to break down. They will no longer have the significant pH messing up factor. Just because they've started, they still need bacteria, other stuff to decay them. But it does sort of a transformation that makes them more, kind of like tempeh, I guess. It sort of makes them more digestible in the soil. Things can work on it because of that mold. So they're very obsessed with brown mold, white molds as opposed to brown molds. See, I would say, why do we care what the color it is? Just want it to be, well, no. The brown molds do not have the same effect. And if you have green leaves on it, you'll not only get bacteria, you'll tend to have this forming of polyphenols and things that are not so nice in the soil. So you'd actually rather the decay does not happen from bacterial action, from fungal action. And again, a lot of it will happen during that first winter. So then they would have us the following spring turn this stuff under, shallowly. Don't plow it under, shallowly rototill it, an inch or two deep or something like that. And then they would dump. So most of this, I'm telling you hearsay, not my own experience, although as far as it goes, my own experience very much confirms what they're saying. Don't plow it under, but shallowly till it in, and then what? Then plant crops in there. And so I says I, what crops? Like maybe beans or peas? No, any crops you want. Well, not corn and potatoes. Yeah, corn and potatoes. I'm a little skeptical about this, but they're saying these heavy feeding crops, go ahead and put those in too. Anything. And they will do just fine. Well, now I'm going to my own experience. The year that I first learned this, we had one of the Michaels, one of our apprentices who was named Michael. He was gung-ho. Oh, that was Michael. He was very excited. Let's do it. It sounds so cool. And okay, we'll do it. I was not so enthusiastic, but we wanted to try it out. So we took a piece of actually very sterile ground on the inner part of one of my terraces, which had been kind of stripped, denuded. It wasn't decent. It was much worse than regular garden soil. And we did this thing covering the chips, and the following spring turned under shallowly. And I planted, I wasn't going to put barley, no way, or cabbage or that kind of thing. I said, let's try some hulless barley, naked barley. Not a particularly heavy feeder, but still it's not a legume, it needs something there. Well, we planted barley there, and it did pretty mediocre. It yielded a so-so yield of barley. And there was no chlorosis. None of the leaves turned yellow, which I would have expected from nitrogen deficiency. Well, Mike was crestfallen. He thought we were going to get some great yield. I was elated. It has to do with our expectations. The fact that we get any barley at all from this piece, plus in the process managed to add some mega humus to the soil, slow humus, long-term humus. Those stuff, I don't know how many years ago that was 1998. There's probably maybe still some residue left, I don't know, that still is mineralizing and decaying. So I thought it was very successful. It's not the same as what the people were telling me that put any crop in there, they'll do just fine. But that it didn't do terribly. It was not a disaster. I thought that was very, very impressive. Now, if it had been decent soil and we were just adding the stuff to it, maybe it would have been. But it was crappy, shitty soil. That we got anything from it that was not all yellow leaf chlorosed was really impressive. So depends where your standards are, I guess. So that's basically what they say with rainmeal chips. Don't plow them out. You'll get the forming of polyphenols, which I guess is sort of like PCBs or something. They're not kind of not good for the soil, but they take forever to break down. Although polyphenols are also apparently good in certain ways. They form certain structures, not only in the soil, but in human health. So I don't know a lot about them, but we don't want polyphenols forming from this stuff decaying, and we don't want the negative pH, all that stuff happening with it. So that's how they say it can be done. Now, how to get them chipped if you don't have a chipper already? Well, I have a chipper shredder, and I'm not sure of any other way I can tell you to do it. I can give you some better news with other things like leaves, but as far as chips, I've heard, again, it's only hearsay, of farmers in Austria taking brush and piling it up, I guess, on the edges of the field, just spreading it out on the ground there and leaving it, and letting it just rot in. Well, I've had some places where I've done that accidentally, where a tree came down some branches and the grass grows up through them. They must spread it out quite thin, because I don't know how they would go over it with a mower or whatever, mow the stuff without getting tangled all up in the brush. In a year or two, the stuff would rot down enough so you could just go right over it, and there's just all kinds of little rotting twigs on the ground. But I don't quite get that. I've heard this, you're hearing this third hand at best. I got it second hand, and the person I talked to hadn't seen it. But there may be some way of using it just as it is. I can really imagine this with finer brush, smaller twigs that would just kind of flatten out. But it's a very low energy thing. It's great. The main energy is with your saw cutting the stuff up. But for the moment, we can get back to this. Instead of talking about the ray meal chips, let's talk about the other big forest residue, which is the leaves. And that's a no-brainer. There's no problem with using that all kinds of ways. Again, as we mentioned before, or this morning, the conventional wisdom about those things is they're too slow to break down, too much carbon to nitrogen. And that there's not enough nitrogen. In fact, they'll say they won't break down well because they don't have enough nitrogen in them. I would like to quickly tell you 2 anecdotes apropos of this. Years ago, we used to go into Farmington, nearby town, and haul leaves from people's lawns. They'd have them raked up. We just pick them up and take them in. It takes some time. It's well worth it. But yeah, I'm noticing back in those days, the town would have the road crew come along and sweep the stuff up and take it off to the landfill. And whoa, I said to Di, I went to one of the guys and says, hey, I'll tell you what if I give you, some money to pay for the extra gas or whatever, bring it out to industry and drop it at my place instead of the landfill. Well, no, we can't do that. We're not allowed to, insurance regs or something like that. Well, okay. Sometime later, I'm talking to the town street commissioner, and they said that, but he said, no, they're just being lazy, they don't want to come, we can go anywhere we want to. And sure, we'll bring them out. And no, you don't have to pay anything for extra gas. It's not much further than the landfill, and you're saving space in the landfill. He got that. So by giving them to me at their expense, they realized that's a good one. It's going into agriculture total. So, great. That fall, 2 big dump trucks come out and unload leaves there. And I think, I'm done. No more going to town for me. I just wait until the windfall comes in every year. So next season comes along, and I use them up. The next season comes along, and I'm waiting for the trucks to come, and the season's going along, and they're not showing up. Finally, I say, what the hell? I go into town, start raking, hauling my own again. I thought I was done with that. Well, next time I see the guy, he says, what happened? How come you didn't bring any? He says, he says, it turns out that they need them at the landfill. Exactly. So wait a minute. I thought you said, I said they have a compost, a city or municipal compost system out there, and they need them for that. Now I'm kind of trying to second guess and jump ahead of him. I said, he says it's because of the horse manure from the stables, from the local the fairgrounds. And I said, I see. They need it for bedding for the horse manure. He said, well, actually, no, it's kind of the other way around. So most of these yuppie horse set people, they have so much, chips, sawdust under their horses, that there is too much carbon to nitrogen. So horse manure, which is noted for generating heat, for mushroom growing and stuff, horse manure is a source of heat. Well, the sawdust, there's so much in there that the horse manure will not break down. There's a paradox. So they're using, get this, they're using my leaves, okay, to generate heat so they can make horse shit break down. This is totally contrary to the way it's not supposed to work that way. So tell me that leaves do not have, this guy, now keep in mind, this local Yankee type of guy, he's not a vegetarian, he's not a veganic, he's a Republican, I'm guessing. And but I mean that in all the best ways. And anyway, but don't try to tell him that maple leaves do not have any fertility value. Anecdote 2. We go up down streets in Farmington and people have a big pile of leaves here, we'd take them away. But we'd always, just as a courtesy, say, would you like us to take away your leaves? And they usually say, well, how much do you want for it? I don't know. And for free? Oh, really? You want to take it? Is the Pope Catholic? What are you talking about? Yeah, please, But still, you don't assume that, because once in a while someone feels a little touchy about you going in their lawn taking their leaves. They want to get rid of them, but they don't know about you. Well, there's one place, this big pile there, and there's a little lady standing there. And he said, hey, you want us to take your leaves away? She said, oh, no. She has a charming Austrian accent. She says, no, I want them myself. Cool, really? What do you use them for? Well, I use them for my garden. And, well, that's neat. That's what we want it for. How do you do it? Well, basically, she piles them up in a big pile in her garden. And she says, I mull them over once in a while. She doesn't shred them. She just mulls them over once in a while. And then she puts them on her garden. And I looked at her garden. This is like late October, something like that. And her smallish garden in her yard, there's the maple trees around it, which are the source of the leaves. So in other words, the only space that's left for garden is in between the trees. So therefore, she doesn't have any grass clippings to add on to it. So this is, we always tell people, grass clippings and leaves, perfect gift. She's got one thing, leaves. Conventional wisdom, not very valuable. Not much carbon, too much carbon and nitrogen, not very valuable. I look at her garden, and the main things that are in there at that time of year, this is an Austrian lady, leeks, cabbage, okay? Huge, big mothers of heads of cabbage, big, beautiful, fat things growing in there. And what else do you put on? Nothing, that's all. Every year, she puts her leaves on it. tell this little old lady that there's no food value to leaves, because those two crops are very demanding, including of nitrogen. They really like lots and lots of humus, and they get it in spades. So leaves are very, very valuable. The thing that the conventional wisdom is right about is they have a lot of carbon in proportion to the nitrogen. So that means to get enough nitrogen, you have to add, let's say, 4 times as much leaves. And the problem with that is, leaves are so easy to get by. You can get a ton of leaves for the same, probably dollar cost and certainly ecological cost of a shovel full of chicken shit. You know, that's just the Mother Nature is so prolific in leaves, and who wants them for something else? No one. Don't get rid of it, please. And so even if you have to add so much more, all that means is you get so much more humus, so much more carbon in the soil. There's no problem with too much carbon in the soil. When they talk about the carbon, it's carbon in relation to the nitrogen. So if you get carbon up the wazoo and a fair amount of nitrogen, then you're golden. And just by the way, you have lots of humus. So you could farm. I've known people who do farm with nothing but leaves. Adding other things to it is great. If I had to have one single thing, I would probably have it be leaves, because not only as we were talking about before, the leaves also contain pandemonium and all those little trace things from way down deep that brought them up. So anyway, now. The way I use them, there's lots of ways of using them. I compost them, I use them for mulch. The main way that I use them is as mulch, for which purpose I don't know if any of these show it very well. For mulching purposes, I want them shredded up. I put them through my chipper shredder. They come out kind of like cornflakes, or very coarse cornflakes, little flakes like that. I don't want them ground up fine, and I don't want them whole. I've tried using them whole, and there's some problems with that. So you're going to tell me, okay, I don't have a chipper shredder, what can I do? Well, my dad used to have this thing he did, which was very cool. He'd just pile them on the apron in front of his garage door, and he'd go over them with his rotary lawnmower, and turn them over, because they would, turn them over and do it again, and it didn't take long to get a job. The only problem with it wasn't very consistent. Some of it would be like micronized into dust, and some of it still some pretty big pieces in there. For some uses, that works just fine. If I'm using it to mulch my paths, that's absolutely fine. Or things that have a little distance between them, like cabbage heads, that stuff works just fine. But for carrots and onions and things that are really close together, and even for grain, if I use it for that, it really wants to be more consistent. And that's where I want the chipper shredder. Now, of course, all of you know as well as I do, when you want leaves shredded up very finely and very quickly, what you do is you pile them into a very big pile in the middle of your yard, and you say to your kids and all the neighborhood kids, stay out of this. And by morning, it'll be just perfect, like cornflakes. It's just great. But my kids figured a long time ago that Daddy wanted them to, so I can't get them in a pile of leaves. I quit when they were little kids, so I had to depend on a chipper shredder. But anyway, and when I'm mulching things with them, by the way, using them this way, with usually mulching, it's kind of time consuming. You have straw or hay or whatever, and you're on your hands and knees trying to put it in between your rows, and you get a nice layer. It's really pain. And it doesn't still work all that well. However heavy you put it, the one place where you can't put it, like right around, I'm a carrot plant, right around there, that's where the weed comes up, because that's where you can't mulch it very thoroughly. Shredded leaves, I don't take any of that time. I could do the size of the footprint of this house in 10 minutes, probably, with this. What I do is I take a big plastic green Rubbermaid trash can, fill it up with the confetti, the shredded leaves, and I'll just walk down the path here, and I'll just make a blizzard over the whole like this. I don't bend over, just up here, and it all kind of, and it blizzards down on the thing, and it settles in very, very nicely. I do this when the crops are maybe anywhere from 2 to 4 inches tall. So in the case of carrots, quite a few of the shreds will get caught in the carrot's hair, that frilly, thing. No problem. It usually will, within hours or whatever, either wind or gravity or rain or whatever, it'll all kind of work its way down there. If I'm really careless, I drop a whole fistful on it, then I'll go down after and knock it off. But in no time at all, this thing is so thoroughly well mulched, right like that. Nothing can come up anywhere around it. Moreover, also given the fact that this material is very eco-efficient. The earth is producing tons of it, no one else wants it. So we can mine it from the forest with no harm. It has all the minerals, all that stuff we were talking about before. It also is an incredibly effective mulch. On 1 inch of shredded leaves, when it first gets a shower, first it's all like fluffy. The first light rain you get, it all kind of like this, and it mats, and it's like basically like cardboard. Okay? And yet water permeable cardboard. So I'm saying 1 inch or so of this will have all of the moisture retaining, weed repressing, cooling effect of, let's say, 5 to 6 inches of hay, and be applicable in no time at all. And in terms of its ecological expense, it's much cheaper than grass. or straw. So I do almost all my land. As soon as the crop is up a little, virtually everything gets mulched, and most of it with shredded leaves. There's some areas where I'll use hay or do something else. And also some green manures, living mulch. That's what this here is. That's a bed with 3 rows of cabbage in it. In between them, I have Dutch clover in there, which spreads out. Being a legume, it doesn't compete with the cabbage. And because now we're getting a lot of specifics here, and we're not going to have time for a lot of specifics, but we'll mention this one. I'll have 3 rows of cabbage, and in between them, what would be rows 2 and 4, if we think of this as 5 rows, 1, 3, and 5 are cabbage. 2 and 4, I'll seed white Dutch clover there. I could put it all over everywhere pretty easily, but one reason I like doing this is white Dutch clover, as opposed to other clovers, does not get to, it sprawls very low. You can tread on it, like you see it growing around the edges of walkways and stuff, because it stands compaction. So the plants may sprawl out and run all through the cabbage, and therefore serve as a living mulch. But the actual root system itself is primarily in that area. So if there were any competition, and I don't think there is between clover and cabbage, then it's like a foot away. So that works really well. I don't do anything with it. It just stays there, grows in among the cabbage, and to come fall it'll get turned under, or next spring get turned under.
And how do you turn it over?
That depends. Sometimes with rototiller, and some areas I use Austrian hoe. In the book, there's pictures of some of the tools I use. A wheel hoe. Wheel hoe doesn't. If the stuff gets it all rank or whatever, the wheel hoe will just tangle up in it. That push cultivator. So I may use an Austrian hoe, chop it in, or sometimes if it's the health thick, some areas I will use a rototiller. I do use a rototiller. I use it minimally. I don't use it to cultivate with. I may use it in the beginning of the season to get, if there's a lot of green manure, a lot of massive organic matter left, debris from previously, I might use it for that, and not always that. As much as I can, I try to leave the dinosaur farts in the ground.
Do you ever use a harrow plow? One of the, the egg beater type?
I don't. I have a conventional rototiller, that kind. I have very few machines. I have my Gravely walking tractor, which powers both a rotary mowing machine that I do my hay, so it's kind of like a big lawnmower. So it's not all tangled up, and if there's any, which my land, this would be perfect for Amie. She's got all those Russian olive and some wild roses and all that, and hardhack, all that stuff. It goes over that and it grinds them all up. If you go through with a sickle bar machine, not only you'll probably break the sickle bar, but you have all the stuff to put. Where's the grass in there? Well, you go over it again and again, and each time, every year, or every time you mow it, you get more grass and less of that stuff. Whether you take it away in compost or whether you leave it right there. So I really like that machine.
What is that called?
Oh, it's just a rotary mower. It's basically, you know what a bush hog is?
Yeah,
It's just basically a small bush hog.
Is it a DR, walk behind brush mower, by any chance?
It's a Gravely. It's the tractor that it goes as an attachment on. Yeah, and they're not made anymore. So now I have to go when I need parts of them. I have to go find some, go online, find
You got
it.
the right idea. I've seen the DR. It's like a walk behind brush hog.
Yeah.
That's what a DR is. Is it anything like a? Do you know what? There's an Italian.
BCS.
BCS, thank you. Yeah, those basically. In fact, when I next get a machine, it will be that, because I think it does pretty much everything that the Troy built does, and so a lot of it. You can flip the handles over so it goes backwards instead of forward, and whatever. Yeah, some kind of a thing like that. It's a lot better than owning a tractor. A lot better than owning a horse. Some people will say, well, a tractor. My horse at least is organic. It's not burning dinosaur farts, all that kind of thing, and they're right about that. On the other hand, it's really hard, especially if you're not a community. And then a guy lives near me at a farm. He's sort of a neo-Amish kind of, or would be Amish. He farms with horses, but he uses it when he needs it. He absolutely needs it. But there's a lot of the year that those horses are just grazing and not. He's paying vet bills and feeding them and all that for the work he's getting. My Gravely, unless I turn the key and start, that's when it burns gas. And the rest of the time it sits there. So that's getting favored. So I don't consider it at all an ideal solution. I'm aiming to someday having some equivalent of it that runs off from either solar batteries, from lithium batteries, or maybe what's that, pyrolysis, basically where you make gas out of wood, or charcoal or something. I'm trying to come up with any number of technological. I'm big on the horticultural part. I'm there. I got it. I know all about it. Everything you need to know. Nothing I need to know. In terms of alternative technology, I don't know shit. And so, but to come up with something like from windmill, I'm getting a windmill, or solar panels or something that would run a moving application. It's one thing, something that sits in place, like my table saw or something like that. But for something that's moving around, moving vehicle, which a rototiller is, a little difficult. That's the thing I see as my next frontier, is try to coming up with ways of doing these things without burning dinosaur farts. and ways that are eco-efficient. Yeah, it's difficult to give you some ideas, but I wish I had a lot more ideas about what to do if you don't have one of these vroom vrooms and yet want to efficiently use. Because given that technology issue hurdle, forest, you can eat at least indirectly from the forest and have a very enclosed system and really be building the soil. That's the thing I emphasize about these particles. They're there for a long time. They build up. Given that you're going to do it anyway, I would almost suggest you might like, if you like rye, you might like to just let it go for a crop. Get a little experience with small-scale grain growing.
Well, I have celiac, so...
Oh, rye
is
is too much like wheat for that?
Gluten green.
Oh, you definitely turn it under.
But anyway,
Yeah.
okay, let's walk over here, and I sort of thought we'll walk to the woods first, and then come back into the fenced area. But even though the woods are back there, we have to go around. I guess I could comment on the fence. I got the idea from my friends Terry and Russ. Terry, raise your hand. Who has a small farm down the road. But so on the bottom is a 3-foot fence designed to keep small animals out. So it's 2 feet up and then 1 foot on the ground. And we're putting a bunch of stones on it, but the grass will grow up through it and mat it down. And then up here is 2x4. 14 gauge is heavier than 16 gauge, right?
Yes.
Smaller numbers heavy. So this is 14 gauge, and that's 16 gauge. And the posts I got for free, they are black locust, so they're really tough. They were telling me they took some of their posts out of the ground after 30 years, and they were just totally fine.
Where did you
So,
get them for free?
well, it was, maybe I better not say
Maybe you
no.
better not tell.
One
They
problem.
were, they were rejects because they had, like, you could see there's a huge knot or they're bent. So they were rejects from a job.
You shouldn't use stainless steel staples in them, even if you could get them, because they would rot out too soon, and the locust would still be there.
Anyway, this ditch, I don't know, it doesn't seem like the water's moving. So there has to be some regrading here. And one of the problems, this pond is not mine.
Oh, it isn't.
No, it's not my pond. It goes to that white house.
Do you have access to it? Can you use it for watering?
But you see, it's emptying right over towards my house. And then it goes down there and creates a little river around my house. So watch out, there's a rock right there sticking out. And now you see why I said to wear boots.
At some point, you're going to have to commit yourself to a rotary mower, preferably a small pushing thing.
Yeah.
Then they aren't terribly expensive, but you're really going to need one because that's more than any other machine. That's what you need here. You
I know.
can take stuff that's now all this rosa multiflora and stuff, all this crap you got around here, which is crap. You can turn it into gold. This is your woods back in here, or not?
No.
That way is okay. See a lot of big old hardwoods. There you go. There's all your leaves.
You know, straight ahead up here now you'll see where the woods I'm talking about. Because this hole along this path, it only goes in about 15 feet. But
Yep.
certainly I can get a lot of leaves out of there.
So you absolutely have the wherewithal here easily to never import a thing onto this land.
So Will, I ordered one of those special tarps so that you can break the leaves into, so it'd be easier and they wouldn't all fall out.
Yeah.
And it just came in yesterday or the day before, and then it had the causes cancer in California tag on it, so I didn't get it.
Yeah, I just use plain old, contractors, the blue woven plastic tarps.
How do you hold?
And they last a couple of years, they photo degrade and they snag and stuff like that. But I just drag them that way. I can haul a couple 100 pounds at a time.
Welcome to Hamlin's ramp farm.
Oh yeah, wow.
So I have some ramps, not a huge amount, but does everybody know what ramps are?
For the interstate. Oh, not a lot of good guys on them.
You know what ramps are?
No, I don't.
Those are ramps, these green things. And you pull them out and it's like little onion bulbs. Yeah.
What do you do with it?
You pull them, but you need something
like
to dig them.
scallions.
If you pull the tops, just break off.
You like scallions?
Yeah, you can eat the
you
tops
eat
too.
Yeah, you can.
But in the bottom
you
is
don't need the green tops necessarily, do you? I've never heard of. Do they? I've always heard of using the.
Okay, watch this, watch your step. I guess there's some sugar maple trees in here, so I'm gonna try to make a little maple syrup next year. I mean, it's not a lot, I don't think, but this goes way over there. And then the stream down here, about 20 feet on the other side is mine too.
Very nice.
And down here I have my 10 shiitake logs, which are also just a beginning, you know, but just to have something. So, does everybody want to come down here, hang out a little bit?
Nice and open park like this.
Yeah, I love this. I come back here and have picnics. So the first year I bought the land, like, the field was 6 feet of weeds, and we accessed it through their yard. The neighbors, I asked them if I could. So I purchased some. I purchased some shiitake logs, and then I throw them in the stream overnight to get them started. But I'll do my own logs, but this was 2 years ago when I first got the land, so I just wanted to have something ready to go.
No, you don't burn wood, right?
Huh?
You don't heat with wood at all, or you don't burn
No, I do want a wood stove, but I don't have one.
How many seasons did you get out of your log?
I don't know, I just got them, so, I mean, like, I got them the year before
You
last.
haven't had any mushrooms yet?
Look at this. Yeah, I have. I don't know how warm does it need to be for mushrooms.
Probably over 50.
Yeah, so I haven't done it yet this year.
They have to be up in the air.
Yeah, I know, because otherwise they get full of slugs.
Do you still have watercress in there?
Yeah, come down and see the creek. And this right here is the tree where I make my daughter stand and pose 4 times a year. The last time she was like, Mom. Yeah.
Now we're gonna go through the stream.
Well, anyway, I'm looking.
No.
Maybe it takes a while before it grows.
No,
mean,
it's growing now. You might. It's just not in this section, probably.
Well, yeah, because there is water.
We had
here.
watercress in our salad that they foraged.
Oh, right. So it's time of year. It's down here somewhere. Actually, there is some here.
Oh, yeah, there's some over
Yeah,
there.
there's a bunch right there.
Yeah.
Do you black knot fungus on them?
I have no idea.
Because
Which ones are
it
those?
looks kind of like a poop. There'd be to look like a black moldy poop on the twig,
Which tree?
and on your black cherries, your rum cherries, like
Right here?
just into that one. These, if they look very healthy and they're growing straight. These someday could be very valuable saw logs if you know someone, a craft person that would use cherry lumber. Down in Pennsylvania, probably here, sometimes they sell them for veneer logs. Up home, we just use it for craft. But I was going to say, if you do have that fungus here like we do, then you mentioned those plums you just got. If they're European plums, like prune plums, then they're doomed. They're not going to have much time. If they're like the Japanese-American hybrids, then they won't even. I've never even seen it on them. They're totally immune to it.
Okay. Well, the plums that I got are not prune plums. They're regular eating sweet.
Okay,
They're not a prune type of a plum.
regular plums, European plums can be sweet, but
Oh.
if they, you remember the names?
No, we can look later.
Yeah. Because if that's the case, you're fine. Otherwise, then you're doomed. There'll just be a matter of time before they'll get it too. But I'm not seeing any sign of it. These look very healthy and
Good.
whatever.
Cherry and walnuts. Walnut's pretty valuable food for lumber,
Yeah.
especially for veneer.
Do you have them around here? We don't have them.
Do you have thoughts about if you're regularly taking leaves from the forest floor, everything we do has a reaction.
That's
It's
right.
not like, oh, this is endless, we can just keep taking it. So do you go to different patches of your woods and take at different times of year?
I have thoughts on
What
that,
do you do?
but I don't have experience with it because I'm only 67 years old. I'd have to be 670 years old or then some. Because it's a very, forest, well think about it, this is one of the beautiful things about forests is they have a very long-term mentality. You can have one year that's so droughty that everything around them is drying up the fields, all the weeds, gardens are drying, and they hardly notice it. They're very much long-haul organisms. They have a memory dwarfing ours. And so they're not mainly depending on this. A lot of their stuff, they like to have some humus, some cover, but they don't need bare ground, but they don't necessarily have to have, for every ton of leaves taken off, you don't have to put a ton of something else back. And that's why it works. That's why the earth has been built up through millennia, millions of years of evolution. Largely because of trees, because forests are so eco-efficient, more than grasslands, more than all the prehistoric woody plants and so on. They make so much. So given that, you should be able to rake these, let's say last fall, could now even, except now you do some damage, but last fall, if you rake this up and don't scalp it really hard, don't take it right down to bare dirt, just get the stuff that comes loosely, which is the last year or two's leaves. You could do that, I'm pretty sure you could do it year after year, for a long, long time. maybe 100 years or so, you might start, whatever. No, but the main thing here that would suffer is all these little things, the things with the ramps and the trout lilies and the little shrubs. They do depend on that.
And things that have been overwintering in the leaf cover and stuff that haven't come out yet. If you raked it now, you'd
Exactly.
be getting
you could do some
more.
damage now. You might not want ferns, a lot of those things. Even if they're not of any industrial or commercial or subsistence use to us, they're there. They have a place in the world. Why not help them out?
But the
Fall would be a lot different. Once they've died back down and they're active parts, yeah, then you could rake it quite a lot. And how much you could, you mentioned a good idea. What if you took some from this year and then some from that one? There's going to be a tendency, however, when you're taking this year's, if you left it last year, you're probably going to get that too. Third year, probably not. It kind of gets matted down so you could rake right over and it wouldn't get up. But I mean, you're asking the right questions. I don't necessarily have the right answers, but you're at the important place of asking the right questions. And that's my opinion is that you could do it to a very large extent, but ultimately, no. At some point, you got to leave something for everything.
Something in there looks kind of
cellulose greens all the way around. All those other, the whole universe of other creatures. And in the process of those guys living and peeing and pooping and breathing and all the things they do,
Nitrogen shows up.
Okay.
So in other words, don't always think of nitrogen or anything else as something you necessarily have to add on.
Yeah,
maybe not. Sometimes it may be there. The air, nitrogen, we just take a breath, 80% of that is nitrogen.
Fix it, yeah.
80% of it, yeah, fixing it, exactly.
Yeah.
And living things, not just legumes, all kinds of living things will fix it in one way or the other. So basically keeping a very high humus level, even if the stuff you're adding is mainly carbon stuff. Nitrogen, build it and they will come.
Because what they teach you is that if there's too much carbon, then the bacteria will just use up all the nitrogen and they won't put any of the solubilized nitrogen back out, and so it actually like stunts all the growth. But you're saying it's okay because other things besides the bacteria will grow in the cellulose.
Like white molds, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't count on the bacteria to even do the breaking down. They're not very efficient at it anyway.
That's awesome. That could revolutionize how we...
Absolutely revolutionize. You're right. But this is a classic example of coming up with the right answer to the wrong question.
Right. Exactly.
Everything they said, you can't say it's a lie. It's absolutely correct as far as it goes.
It's just not the whole story.
And because of not having a whole story, it means you cripple yourself. You fail to do something because you think you have to. It's a recipe. I have to bring in some nitrogen. I have to bring in some of this. I have to add something to it. And even though it's all right there.
Okay, that is so helpful. Thank you.
So often the remedy to some of these things is not so much adding something as doing something. The mainstream, quote, is trying to get with it, like with organic, for example. Like the University of Maine has a sustainable ag department. It's not really sustainable at all, but the fact they even talk about it and look at it, they have come up with some very good ideas. But still they're based on industrial agriculture. Is their underlying assumption.
Well,
subsistence agriculture doesn't count. Gardens don't count.
Right.
And yet that's very often where the most exciting things happen, are not in farm fields, but in gardens.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And just one of the things I wanted to look at was trying to figure out how can I, even though there's so many problems with this ugly industrial agricultural system, how can we make it better,
That's right.
So I think maybe instead of using all that inorganic fertilizer to supplement the manure, we should be using leaves.
Yep.
Because then it won't give off the nitrous oxide to the greenhouse gas and everything.
Wherever they're at and they're thinking, you try to go further and try to take them further.
Okay.
Try to look into
this was
more
so
depth.
helpful because I didn't even think leaves. So this is great.
To its credit, industrial agriculture, or what do we call it, mainstream and academic, like university and stuff.
Yeah.
They're trying to get with it.
Yeah.
They have some underlying baggage that keeps them from asking the right questions, but.
And we needed it, with the plant breeding and everything in order to feed everybody.
Yep.
During the population boom, but now it's time to refine it,
Yeah, and we can't always, particularly if you're dealing with these people, you can't necessarily look at the ideal.
Right.
You like someone said, never don't let the ideal be the enemy of the good.
Exactly. That's why I'm just trying to make something that's not ideal at all. Dairy's better.
An incremental improvement.
Yeah.
Always go for that. Always vote the incremental improvement. I didn't get to show you with those things, posters in there, the arranged configuration of them with oats. I mean, with let's say carrots or something. They're right in the row, and there's the path. But with grain, there's if I left that path empty, I don't need the path for grain. I can walk right through that. And so therefore, there's 2 or 3 rows of grain that I'm missing, at least 2. And so I said, what the hell? I just go right, since it's all the same level, just go right across. It almost ceases to be a bed. I just treat it all as one giant area. Well, if you got raised beds, how do you do that? That space, there's a lot of wasted space in that, and you're committed to wasting the space. You can't rotate it around from year to year. So that's as far as the raised beds. But also with like root stout, with the no-till thing, or lasagna or anything like that, if you're just going to put in some different kinds of plants next year, different kind of plants the other year, how do you do grain in that? You got to get rid of that. Well, at some point, you got to till it under for that. At that point, the soil will be very, very rich because of all that accumulated stuff. That's wonderful. But I don't know how not to till it, except what someone was mentioning earlier who was connected with the Land Institute in Kansas. The kind of thing that they're doing might turn that whole thing on its head. Because if you have perennial wheat, let's say, then, well, for one thing, you probably wouldn't move it around. You would have to rotate. Because a lot of originally in the Near East, where wheat was first domesticated, discovered and stuff, the original wheats that were mainly used were either perennial wheats or self-seeded and things like that. So they didn't have to worry about that. They didn't rotate. They're the same year after year after year, the same stuff. I had always wondered where the origin of the Tompkins County King apple was, and when I passed this roadside Stetton market yesterday, I realized it's I'm not surprised. So many Cortland, so many big apples are from this area, like Eastern Massachusetts and Maine. You have a lot of
Tompkins King was a really big one.
Yes, it was very large.
Say, go out and get me one apple to make a pie.
So is there any advice that you want to give, or looking at this, that what would you do with it?
That's the main question.
You've got your overall slope here. It's not too steep. It's got a little slope there, but not enough to be problematic. And at some point, you're gonna want to ditch at the base of this to carry this off a little bit better and to join that one. It wouldn't have to be a deep one at all. And don't think we always think of a ditch as like a deep thing like that. Deep ditches are problematic in that you trip in them, you lose things in them, we can't mow it or like that. Sometimes the best thing is a much wider but shallow, like say 4 feet wide, but just a very shallow basin. Then you just mow right over it, you walk right over it, you run your machine right over it. But it goes in that direction, and you've done a nice job of contouring this, which is actually a problem for your ditch, because your ditch is not got much slope, it's a contour. So you're going to have to make it shallower at this end and deeper at that end. Not a big deal, just a few inches at each end. And the same thing with that ditch. So you've got a problem there, which it's an advantage at this point, but it's great they took the water that far. You want it to keep on going. So again, you're going to need to make it shallower, deeper at one end than the other. And it's not hours of work. It's not that you would shovel one person, you need to get a backhoe in here or something. I don't think to do that. Well, the right person.
Are you trying to say something?
No, I'm not. I don't know what I'm saying. You're looking at me as if maybe I should be saying something. But she solved, some of the problems we mentioned in there, she solved one of them big time. In fact, I got a question. What's this doing here?
Protecting from deer.
But why?
Oh, because this fence wasn't up and the fence isn't
Oh, okay. This is a great solution to...
winter fence.
Yeah.
I mean, until I get a fence.
But this is a kind of elaborate solution. The fact that she had the free locust post was a real big one, but she's put a fair amount of money and labor into doing this. But in the long term, she basically has dealt with one major pest problem, a very major one, deer. And probably that's going to help you pretty much with, you have woodchucks around here. I mean, they could go onto that. They're not like that. You're going to have an issue. At some point, you're going to have an issue with that foot or so you got on the ground, like grass will grow up through it. Assuming you want to keep it at all kempt, I assume you want to keep it mown somewhat, but not necessarily short. So you want to be able to mow it without getting your wire in it.
Yeah.
But if you have a kind of a mower, like again, a rotary, if you get that thing I'm talking about that you need anyway, you'll be able to set it high enough so that that'll never be an issue. Just don't mow it short. Then you've got so many problems licked here by just that alone.
When you'd had the guy in here last year to plow, was that in the fall or summer? Summer. So what I would have recommended is if you had cover cropped it right then you wouldn't be looking at all this grass.
Yeah.
You could have put down field peas
would have smothered it.
or winter rye or something.
I was reading Will's book, and there were so many different suggestions for cover crops. I wanted to say, like, how do I know which one would be the best one?
If the timing were right, one of the best ones for this is you're not wanting the cover crop, in this case so much for fertility, you want a smother crop. And if you can do it in the frost-free season, there's no crop like buckwheat for smother, because it's so aggressive it'll smother, it'll steal all the water and all the phosphorus, and among other things, and all the sunlight from this stuff, so it'll choke them out.
So after I mow this, can I plant that, or is it too late for
that? Might work just right.
Yeah, if you can mow this down and get the buckwheat down.
And just throw it down. I don't have to Doesn't have to be dug in or
You
anything?
can rake it in a little bit.
Rake it in.
It's ideal to get some contact to it, depending on the weather.
One of the big metal rakes.
What about when it goes to flower and seed, buckwheat? Is that a problem?
There's two things you can do. You can get a crop of buckwheat to eat, which is that's very easy. It's one of the easiest grows to grow. In a sense, with celiac, you know, it'd be a fine grain to grow. Processing it, sifting it, stuff is actually very, very easy to do. If she doesn't want buckwheat coming up here next year, then she's got to cut it before then. But I don't know if there's a particular reason not to have buckwheat coming up next year. You can always kill it then. It's pretty easy. It's very easily killed.
Yeah, it's got a shallow root.
So it's not necessarily a problem, but it's kind of a case like with the rye, deciding do I want a grain crop or do I want a green manure crop. In some ways, in favor of cutting it when if you get in as early as you can, like say June, whatever, you know, as soon as there's no frost danger, and let it go to seed and cause it to shatter, you know, spread all over the place. Then if it comes back again, because I don't know, someone that knows more about the wintercress than I do. Once it's mowed, it's going to keep coming back, isn't it? Is that going to stop it dead?
Well, it's a biennial, so...
I guess we'd come back weekly.
Weekly, yeah, but since it's already pretty advanced in the flowering, it might already be, I don't know.
Good root.
To do it now.
It probably has a big enough root.
Yeah. I mean,
Well,
once it goes to seed, it dies. But whether you can trick it into cutting it now and it thinks it's gone to seed.
I think it would grow back some, yeah.
Well, you'll find out.
But if I get a lot of
if you put a lot of buckwheat.
How many pounds of buckwheat do I need to cover this?
Oh, do the whole piece? I don't know. It's a number. I don't
They
know.
give you suggestions where you buy the seed. They give you suggestions on how much to.
But you'd want to seed it much thicker than you would for grain. To get, you know, for if I'm seeding buckwheat for eating, I use my push cultivator, my seeder, and get it in the space like grain. If I'm green manuring it, I just broadcast it and get it on the thick side than more than the thinner side. But that's an important point, though. You mentioned about it's a biennial. Presumably, there's a whole seed bank here of seed lying there to replace it. So even if you herbicided this stuff, I mean, there's more waiting to come up. And so one of the solutions to that is, but you got a whole big piece, you don't want to tie it up forever, is if you till it and let it sprout until it, you know, if you spend a whole season letting it be fallow and keep tilling it, but that's your whole piece, so you don't want to do that.
And is there anything I can grow with interspersed in the buckwheat, even if the buckwheat is thick? Like pumpkins or something
buckwheat
like that?
Is very aggressive.
That's the whole idea.
It does not play well with others.
Okay.
But the bees love it. You might want to get your beekeeper friends to bring a couple hives up. The bees absolutely love buckwheat.
But you could also, you know, I'm looking at, this is a big space to take on for 1 year.
Yeah.
So if it was me, I would do buckwheat cover crop on some of it, then I'm thinking next year. I would do like pumpkins in some of it. They act as a good cover crop just for smothering, and you'll get some food out of it.
Not only that, squash and pumpkins, because they're far apart. If you plant them in hills and like 8 feet every direction, then even the stuff, whether it's buckwheat or wintercress or whatever does come up there, you can keep attacking it during that season till the 4th of July or so when the vines start running. Whereas you put carrots or onions there, you got all these weeds in between them all that you're not going to do anything with that.
Yeah, grow big, robust
far
plants.
apart. Yeah.
Well, I bought 5 different kinds of pumpkins, so then when my nonprofit, the one that I work for, has its fall gala in New York City, hopefully I'll have a whole bunch of pumpkins to take there.
Fun.
For decorations.
You could do, I was describing to Will this idea of lazy beds, you could, which we learned about in Ireland. And you could take some of these beds, and essentially what you do is if you wanted this to be a potato bed, you go along with the spade and cut a sharp edge, and then you actually just fold the soil in from either side. Use a big tool.
You want to mow first that stuff.
Yeah, mow it first, and then cut your edge, and then you cut little slits that let you kind of fold these flaps in over, and then you plant potatoes right down the center. And if you cannot have that hinge break at the edge, then weeds don't grow out the side. And that's what they do in Ireland when they're turning a lawn or a weedy field into a garden. They do the lazy bed potatoes first. Wow. And you end up with these kind of low ridges, and all the weeds break down inside and feed the potatoes. And the potatoes are so robust and leafy, they will almost act as a cover crop.
Now, if you were doing that here, would you make them on the contour or against the contour? Because each of those ridges is going to collect water. Would that be a problem?
I think I would do those beds coming down this way, right? And then
Well, if you're doing that, then that gives you another opportunity then, because see how this is in strips now? You might do the tilling and all the mowing stuff you're doing with your wintergrass, and maybe put your crop where there's no wintergrass.
You could do the
in other words,
lazy beds where the grass is.
So half of your land is relatively weed-free and good for crops, and the other half you scrub on that. Instead of taking a big section and doing it, just alternating. That might be an idea.
I have a question for you. Have you thought of doing this in a 3-year stage? This is a huge amount of land.
No, I'm not doing everything. I can't do everything. I don't have any, really, I don't have equipment. I don't have, labor. I don't have
money, labor, all
money. No, I don't have anything. So I'm just gonna, no. But I wanted to fence in the whole area so that I would be ready for expansion when I am ready for
That's a really
expansion.
good idea.
First step.
Because where I live, we have a huge garden. Chris knows it. Most of it is not used at all. And so it goes through its own natural cycle. But to hack out all the goldenrod and the other plants becomes a big job every year. So
Well,
that's
I'm gonna
why
do
I
the green-
suggested stages of development.
Yeah, it will be like that. But the green, I do want to, I don't know. Will was telling me something interesting, which would probably be maybe interesting for people here. Probably everyone here knows more about this stuff than I do, but I had soil samples done from a bunch of different areas around the property. Like I knew the fruit trees were going to be up here and whatever. So I knew the raspberries were going to be down there originally. Now they're not going to be, but it said I have way too much calcium and not enough phosphorus. And anyway, all this stuff. And Will tells me, well, it's there. You just have to make it available. You really don't need to go out and buy stuff. So
You seem to have a perfect soil fraction here. This is a little clay. Mine tends to be a little too sandy in some ways, a little too much similar to this. And you've got lots of small rocks. A lot of the rocks are slaty looking things that are breaking down. But this should be really good as far as minerals.
okay.
There's a lot of negative ion capacity stuff here that chemists call it. And so, yeah, I'd be really suspicious if they're telling you need so much of this one. It means you need to do something to make it available. You do not necessarily have to import it. And in this case, I would really be very rare, I think, that soil, unless they've been totally farmed over, worn out by exporting stuff in the form of milk or whatever, or if the soil is there are some people gardening on 30 feet deep sand. What do you do with that? It's simply not there. And even if you add it, it's not going to stay there. But you've got the opposite case. You're kind of golden here, Amy. You got a lot of cool things going about this.
Well, the reason that this is the fenced-in area is because I do have a soil map, and this is the best soil on the property, right in here next to this
wasn't just
pond.
a lucky blind guess.
No, I purposely put it here.
What kind of soil?
I don't remember what it's called.
What was the previous use of this land?
Nothing for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
That was another reason it was appealing to
Your
me because it
phosphorus
was
level should be fine. If you'd said it was they were taking hay off of it year after year after year,
no,
not putting anything back
nothing at all. And I don't know what it was 30 years ago.
In fact, one of the best sources of phosphorus actually is sod. Typically when you plow an old hayfield or old grassland, because phosphorus basically is a root mineral.
Well, see, this was not. I took the samples before it was plowed, and you told me that disrupting the sod would make it available, right?
Yeah, exactly. Once you turn the grass under, then it starts releasing. Because you've got whatever you said, 30 years or something of it accumulating the phosphorus and not being exported.
And phosphorus is what plants need for flowering, so obviously.
Oh,
I think
not a problem
That's
apparently.
a sign.
But what about the way too much calcium? Is that going to hurt any plants?
I haven't heard of that.
Well, what was the pH? No, there is such a thing. It can lock up certain other. It can give you a deficiency, for example, of magnesium or potassium. In other words, the proportion of it, and also like in alkaline soils. Do you know what the pH is here? Is it reasonable? Was it?
I'll show you the notebook.
It's probably a little bit acidic. I'm assuming most of the Northeast. I mean, a place like the Southwest, there'd be lockup of phosphorus and iron and so on, be locked up because of the low pH. And so there, calcium is a big problem. It ties up stuff.
But our soils especially in the hills of Tompkins County, tend to be slightly acidic.
That's what I would kind of be guessing.
Yeah, so I'd be surprised if it would be too long.
I used to stay on vacation. I used to stay on a farm down in the Lehigh County, Pennsylvania, where the bedrock was limestone. The rocks in it were all limestone, and yet they had sometimes had problems with the pH of the soil. So, and they certainly had plenty of calcium. That all just underscores what I've been saying before about sometimes what the land really needs is not so much to have something added to it as something done to it. Like, for example, the ditching here, getting the water carried away, maybe a cross ditch at the top to keep excessive, all kinds of things. But she's off to a really good start. She's got a naturally good situation. I think the soil texture, you don't have huge boulders here, it looks like. A lot of small rocks, which actually is better than the river bottom land, I think, any day.
Yeah, it's good for drainage.
Well, it might work best to have I don't know exactly where your boundary with your neighbor is, but if you have that low place there, have a cross ditch, go into that, and come down into, I guess, into the pond, I suppose, to
Yeah.
cut that water before it gets onto the piece.
My property line is about 5 feet outside the fence.
Yeah, that'd be a great place for a
So I
ditch
can
then.
just do that.
Yeah, because maybe you're getting some runoff from the road
Yeah.
for that corner.
Well, wouldn't you want to make the water run as much as possible? So maybe like do like a zigzagging through the garden rather than let it
Okay,
go all the
why
way
as
up?
much as possible? You're probably onto something, but
Just I mean, if you kind of make it bypass your garden, then wouldn't you get into issues?
Drought.
Right.
Well, again, it depends. If this is a naturally wet place, then you'd like a little drought.
Right.
But that's a good point. There's lots of ways of dealing with it. One, if you had a bigger piece, would be putting a small pond up there, a holding pond, getting a backhoe in here to get out, so that surplus is there. But then on the other end, when you want to run it back through here, but so far it doesn't look like it's a problem. So I think her biggest concern is leading it away.
Yeah.
Is that your pond or is the neighbor's pond, but you can pump water out of it?
Well, she doesn't know that because she doesn't know who the neighbors are. She said that's just been bought or being
It was
sold.
a repossessed house, and
Nobody lives there, right?
I think it just sold for $28,000.
It just sold?
And I suspect, since I haven't seen anyone around, maybe somebody's going to flip it or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, the pond
Well,
is there.
that's one of an infinite number of reasons why it'd be good to cultivate your neighbors.
Yeah.
It'd be great to have access to that pond. That
Or-
would do
yeah,
them no harm if you
exactly.
pump from it.
Yeah, if you had access to that pond
Yeah,
water.
well, I
that would be
also had them stick
brilliant
a
in a dry year.
thing on top of my well right there so that I could hook a hose or hook.
Because then one's question
some
becomes almost moot.
irrigation to
It becomes almost moot because you can take away as much as you want. It's right next to you to put it back.
That's
You
true.
know?
Right, yeah.
Right.
And you can
Yeah.
easily just put a little pump in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic asset to have. We had a
Well, I'll
pond.
have-
We just had a pond put in last fall
Oh,
after last summer's drought.
You might like at some point. I'm trying to do a lot more of it because we're having increased. We never used to have water problems, but get a couple of those 500-gallon or whatever tanks, white plastic tanks, recycled whatever. Put them up on a tower, 10 feet up in the air or whatever. And mine, we have the solar pump pumps it up. So that during the summertime, just about any day, I can just gravity feed, turn on a faucet, and have water. Any of these have leaky hose or whatever, wherever you want it.
Nice.
I'm trying to move more to automatic sorts of things because I'm 67 and I can't afford a lot of helpers. I'm trying to come up with things that can take care of themselves or just flick a switch. It's getting awfully attractive.
Where did you get your fruit trees from?
Cummins. Yeah, and I have 11 more on my back porch.
Nice.
So I have to dig some holes and.
Yeah, these are great.
Oh, Will, what do you think about the distance? Are they not far? These are almost all semi-dwarfs. There's no dwarfs. There's semi-dwarfs, and I think a couple of them are full size.
You're saying this is 15? I guess it is only 15 feet.
I don't know. I think they were about
No, you're about
15
right,
feet.
15, 16 feet.
That's plenty of space.
Well, it's fine for dwarfs.
They're semi-dwarfs, yeah. They'll go. Ours are semi-dwarfs, right?
Well, I've got some semi-dwarfs that are they're like 20-something feet, and they're grown together. I mean, it didn't take that many years before they were grown together there. Because it's not only I don't want them intertwined, but I like enough space in sunlight, for scab and stuff. I like a fair amount, and pollination, a fair amount of light on it. But semi-dwarfs will probably be fine. I mean, for dwarfs, I'm sure it's fine. I try to go with at least 23 feet. Well, that's true. I'm thinking of apples. Yeah, apples and pears.
How
Yeah.
about it pruning them so you keep them smaller?
Yep.
Is that bad for the tree?
No, it's just bad for your patience probably. It's just quite a lot of intensive paying of care. It's like bonsai, it's cute if you make a cult of it and spend every hour taking this bud off, and there's a limit to how much I like. Mine get pruned once every 3 or 4 years, whether they need it or not. But I mean, mine suffer sorely from neglect, and therefore I don't get the maximum production from them. But what I get is so much more than I could use that even if I get a third of the, well, actually, recent years I've been getting a lot of production from them, even though they are untended, not pruned as much as they should be. But yeah, you can control the size a lot that way.
And in the meantime, I would grow something between them. because
Yeah, I was thinking of that.
You have a lot of space that's just going to get weedy.
Like vegetables, put my vegetable crops
put
around
your
them.
vegetables up here this year. This is
Okay.
your
Yeah, at
open,
least it's
well-drained space.
the least amount of weeds too. Yeah.
In fact, one of my
It's not that
a
weedy.
really old farm book, like from 1860s or something, the guy talks about when you put in, I think he's talking particularly about plum trees maybe, but anyway, he recommends the farmer plant in among it either corn or particularly sunflowers. Corn or sunflowers, give them a slight shade because they're prone to scald in their first years. Too much sun, too much open. And of course then you get a crop, whether it's for birds or eating or whatever. And but in China they do an awful lot, particularly a lot of times on the dikes between rice paddies. is they will sometimes have tree crops growing on, whether they do or not, there'll be a few rows of soybeans on it, like maybe a 6-foot wide thing. It'll be a bed, surrounded by rice paddy. But you get a lot of good garden space. And this is nice, well drained, and this is good soil. Oh, an awful lot of fruit can be growing.
Oh, you don't need to ask. Okay, whatever.
No nightshades either.
Okay.
No gluten, no nightshades.
She had lots of things growing here last year.
Pepitas. You can always use more. You can always use more pepitas, hulless pumpkins. And again, the fact that they don't need it, that'd be a great way of talking about a plate. We want to be able to keep weeded in between them. Put a hill here, 6 feet away, another one, and you could have a huge crop on here. And unlike squash and pumpkins, well, you have a big demand for squash with your event there. But pumpkins.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but there's a limit. There's a finite amount. Even our family, we eat quite a lot of squash, but there's a limit how much squash you want. But pepitas, no way. The hollow seeds, they're like sunflower seeds. They're like a staple. They're an oil crop. They're not a vegetable. They're an oil crop.
Apparently, in the Three Sisters Gardens, because we had a lecturer last week in my office who's a Tuscarora Indian, and she said when we hear about the Three Sisters Gardens, it was the pumpkin seed that was the really important part of the pumpkin. That the pumpkin flesh was just a fall tree, and there was water, but that real key protein source for them.
So this is really great. It's 10 of 3.
Okay.
So maybe we should head back in the house, wrap things up. If anybody else needs a book still, or get your stuff. And if you want to hear more from Will, you can come see us at Green Star's classroom at 4 o'clock and continue this discussion there.